My friend and I always used to walk through a wonderful and spacious park when we were younger. It was full of tall trees, and it was very nicely maintained. In this large park there was an abandoned mansion. I can't really say how long it had been there, but on that day, the front door of the mansion was wide open. The two of us decided to check out what was inside the place. As we inched through the door, the very first thing we noticed is that the mansion's floor was littered with crumpled up pieces of paper. We looked at each other and observed that there was no furniture. Nothing except for these wrinkled balls of paper. The mansion had 6 rooms on its main floor, and every room we entered bore more and more of these scrunched up pieces of paper. We decided to open up one of the paper balls to see what was actually inside. Our curiosity got the better of us. I picked up a single wrinkled piece, and as my friend picked up another, I unfolded mine, smoothing out its bends and dents. At that moment, it was almost as if a piece of a rainbow emerged before our eyes, and I was suddenly standing next to a large window in one of the upstairs rooms of the house. I was looking outside into the large park. When I looked down at the piece of paper I held, it read, "Look outside the large window that oversees the park in the upstairs parlor." I dropped the piece of paper, and it fluttered gracefully to the ground. Meanwhile, I stared at my open hands in a bout of horror. Dazed and utterly perplexed, I found my way downstairs and met up with my friend. He was in the kitchen, sitting at a round table that hadn't been there before. Where did that come from? I wondered. My friend stared at his open paper and reread the words several times before he looked at me and turned the page my way. It said, "Go to the kitchen and sit at the round table." We stared at each other for a few moments, vaguely afraid, but then we began to chuckle. Within seconds we were laughing our heads off, marveling at our newfound game. We could hardly believe what had happened, but being young, as we were, the mystery was endlessly exciting. We decided again to open up another scrunched up piece of paper. As we opened up the crumbled papers on the floor, we experienced the same sudden flash of rainbow colors, but this time I ended up lying down in the field behind the mansion. When I peered onto the paper in my right hand, it read, "Lie down in the field behind the mansion." After a few minutes of running around the house, I found my friend collecting multiple balls of paper in his arms, eager to experience more of these strange, exciting phenomena. We both got the gist of what was happening at this point. We had no idea as to how it was possible, but we decided to have more fun with it. The supernatural always had a way of captivating our hearts. After a few more run-throughs with these strange mini-teleportation devices, I began to feel apprehensive. I wondered if, at one point, I would be placed somewhere I didn't want to be, or I'd be made to do something that I didn't enjoy. We continued, though. Minute after minute, we unfolded many papers and traveled through bedrooms, closets, trees. But then, after having been on the roof of the mansion, I stood before my friend, dead, on the living room floor. I didn't scream. I couldn't. "Murder him," I read on my crumpled page as I felt a surge of vomit and bile rising into my throat. Nothing came out, but the sickness in my throat spread to my stomach, my head, and my heart. I didn't know what to do. At this point, I began to scream and shout, praying to God for this to be a nightmare. I wanted it to go away. I wanted to rewind our day and be outside again, together, walking underneath the trees. All I could do was hide his body in a cupboard. I willed myself to be calm, and I hesitantly unfolded another paper in the hopes that the problem would just correct itself. Once again, I saw the colors of the rainbow, and I found myself standing behind a tree several meters away from the house. I could clearly see the front door. Within a few moments, I saw both myself and my friend. Myself and my friend walked through that door. I began to wonder if I had died, or if I was having an out-of-body experience. I looked at the sheet in my hand, and the only words scrawled upon it were, "Time will repeat itself, and a paradox will take place, and it will be allowed." That gave me an idea. In my pocket remained the paper that made me kill my friend. Without looking at it, I crumpled it back up. Quietly, I followed my other self, who had separated from my friend as he explored the rooms of the house. As I crept behind him, he turned around very suddenly. Before he could utter a syllable, I forced the paper in front of my own eyes, and, in a flash of rainbow colors, I was able to kill my other self. The laws of time allowed me to take over my dead self's place in this world, and also because of the fact that it was allowed to happen, as it was written on the second piece of paper that I had on me, which reversed time. It must have control over time and paradoxes, which made me, now, the new, alive and present of my other dead self. I hid my limp and bleeding other dead self in a cupboard in the upstairs bathroom to rot. To my great relief, I heard my friend call my name from downstairs. My friend who managed to stay alive and well. My best friend. When I went downstairs, he greeted me excitedly, smiling childishly and being blissfully unaware of the situation. I pretended that nothing had happened. In a heartbeat, I told him that the house creeped me out, and that it would be much better if we left. After that day, we never went near the mansion again. I don't know if anyone saw or heard about anything that happened between us, but I recently heard from another friend that the house had been demolished. And I can tell you, with great certainty, that while this news was a relief, I dreaded the probable prospect that my corpse was uncovered in that bathroom cabinet. I'm not one for superstition or believing in the paranormal, but some things can't be explained. I suppose we resort to the supernatural as a last resort. Well, after what happened to me, I'm still not sure what to believe. I guess I'm in denial, just shrugging it off, assuming it didn't really happen. Who knows? It all started when I was 12. I was living with my parents in an old manor in England. It was a home for the elderly and owned by my grandmother. My parents both worked there full-time, and I went to the school down the road. It was a quiet town, and not much happened there. So, naturally, I turned to exploring the old house, checking out the attic and cellar, and wandering around the corridors. The old people in the home scared me, I won't lie. They'd often shriek and scream in the night, and for a young boy it was pretty unnerving. My parents and I lived on the floor below the attic, reserved just for us. They were always so worn out from work that they'd often sleep through the scary wailings of the old women and the scratching noises on the old wooden ceiling above my bedroom. I was scared at first, but fear eventually turned to curiosity, and I worked up the courage to explore the attic again, searching for this scratching sound. Mom and Dad were down in the kitchens, helping the other staff cook lunch for the residents. I borrowed a chair from my mom's dressing table and stood on it, fingers outstretched, reaching for the door to the loft. With an old creaky groan, the door swung downwards and the rusty metal ladder rattled noisily. I took a deep breath and climbed up. It was the same as it had always been. The untouched boxes of old residents' belongings were stacked in uneven rows, looking a bit ominous in the dull gray light from the small window at the far end of the room. It was silent. But then, the scratching began. I turned around, standing solid, and my eyes were searching frantically for the source. But I could see nothing. I walked back, past the ladder, into the darkest end of the attic, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. I carried on, and just walked past more and more boxes, until at the end of the room, leaning against the wall, was a pristine mirror. An intriguing thing with an intricate pattern carved into the frame, resting on two legs, and it had one of those pegs in the middle so it could flip over. It was as tall as I was when I was 10. The scratching had stopped, but I walked towards the mirror anyway. I was fascinated. It had some chips around the edges and there was a crack in the top of the oval, but other than that, it looked in pretty good condition. I instantly decided that it would live in my room in that house. Later that same day, my dad carried it down for me, unsure as to why I wanted such an odd thing in my room. I mean, let's be honest. Old antique mirrors are hardly the things coveted by a 10-year-old boy, but still, this mirror had a charm about it. It was the same night that it was in my room that it held my reflection in the light that the paranormal things began to occur. I woke up to the scratching noise again. I instantly looked upwards, but it wasn't coming from the attic. It was the mirror. Perplexed, I flicked on the lights and stared at the mirror. I stared back at myself, but then, in the corner of my eye, I saw the face of a man, Chinese, glaring at me from underneath my bed in the reflection of my mirror. I swung my head over the side and saw nothing. There was nobody there. I thought I had just imagined it, but when I looked back at the mirror, and the same man, there he was, angry and glaring, the same man, his presence malevolent. He was just staring at me from outside my window. I rubbed my eyes and, gaping, started for the window. Of course, there was nothing there. This continued as I grew up. We moved out of that house and down south into a smaller home for the elderly. Again, we lived on the top floor, and again, the mirror went with me. It scared the crap out of me, but I was still curious. Who was this man inside this old mirror? Angry. He never spoke or moved. He just glared at me, his head poking out from random spots each time I looked back at him. It was when I reached 17 that I decided I was going to find out more. Who was this man? What was he doing? But nothing came to me. I asked my grandmother if he used to be an old man who once lived at the home, but he wasn't. She didn't even know where the mirror had even come from. I did research on the internet and came across a website that warned of spirits in mirrors. I couldn't help but laugh at that. The site was constantly popping up with reminders and offers of voodoo instruments and stuff like that. I just ignored these. I didn't even bother asking my parents for advice either. They were still working flat out trying to keep this business going. But it was on my 18th birthday that the man inside the mirror did something unusual. He moved while I was looking at him. I was lying in bed, morning after a night out drinking with friends. I was feeling pretty worse for wear and I was just watching him with an amused expression. His expression, however, remained angry. His head was peeking out of my wardrobe door. But then my eyes widened as a withered arm reached out, then another, and then his legs. This angry Chinese man was moving in my mirror. He wore nothing but a pair of black shorts. His skin was pale, like he hadn't seen sunlight in many years, and his eyes seemed angrier than before. I stared, wide-eyed and shocked. A cruel smirk turned up on his lips, and as he walked towards the mirror, I slowly stood up from my bed, and I walked towards the mirror. My reflection changed before my eyes. I couldn't believe it. My reflection became the man inside the mirror. I stood now only a few feet from the mirror, staring. He glared back, his eyes now shining a vicious crimson. The smirk was back, and he raised his right hand towards me, and I did the same thing without any thought. My fingertips were reaching for his for mine. His eyes were widening, his smirk extending. I could see his yellow teeth beneath his gnarled and cracked lips. We kept eye contact. The split second before my fingertips touched the mirror and the man, my door flew open with a bang, and stunned, I spun around. It was my grandmother with a portrait of the Chinese man. There was a deafening roar of unmistakable anger. The noise was so loud I dropped to my knees and covered my ears, my grandmother gritting her teeth and still focusing on the mirror. The disturbing sound stopped, and I stood up, panting for breath. I looked at my grandmother, who smiled at me before gasping and dropping the old portrait of the man, who, even on canvas, looked as angry and terrifying as he did in the mirror. The frame snapped and the canvas flopped, face down onto the floor. I turned around, half expecting to see the man standing right in front of me, but I saw only the mirror. There, scratched into the mirror, in sharp, elongated letters, was the word, "Soon." My sister had a teddy bear. A scary teddy bear. I don't know why, but it just creeped me out. It was just so disturbing to me. The thing had eyes that looked so real. It was as if it was made from a real bear, and its face was just blank and unsettling. I first started to get weird feelings about this bear when my sister first got it. She was only a baby at the time, and I was about 4. We had a dog, you see, and he had a habit of eating things, so my mother always had to put it up on the small cabinet in the corner of the hallway upstairs. Every time I went up those stairs, I saw that creepy bear suddenly glare around the corner at me, as if it was watching me. This wasn't the weird part. It started to get really weird about 5 years later. At the age of 6 or 7, my sister had lost interest in this bear, so my mother just threw it in the old toy cupboard. The only problem was that the cupboard was in my room. When I was 9, and old enough to stay on my own and go to bed without any assistance, every night I would get into my bed at night and turn my lamp off. This is when it always got scary. As I was getting some sleep, I suddenly remembered Mom putting that teddy in the cupboard. I slowly turned to look over across my room to see it through the glass. My heart suddenly stopped as I thought about the horrors the plush had caused me. But at the age of 9, I wanted to grow up and lose my fears, so I just shook it off and put my head on the pillow. When I got up to pull my sheets on a bit further, I noticed something that would scar me for life. There, at the end of my bedroom, sat the teddy. My heart started beating normally again. I sat there staring at it for about a minute. When I needed to yawn, I closed my eyes. I opened them to see the teddy sitting closer to my bed. At this point, I was really freaked out. I started to move back to the wall and looked around to see if there was any sign that anyone had come in. When I looked back to see the teddy on the end of my bed, I was so startled that I almost fainted from fear. When I blinked, it had gone. I looked around. To my relief, I saw no sign of it. I sat my head back down on my pillow, hoping for some sleep. And then when I opened my eyes again, it was above my head, staring straight down. I screamed as it lunged down at me. I will never see a bear the same way again. A few years later, after years of horror, I burned it. I sat in enjoyment as the bear was turned to smoking ashes in my fireplace. I have lived my teenage life through adolescence. The only thing I could remember that was in any way similar to my bad experience with the bear was when I watched Trainspotting. That fucking baby scene shocked me so badly, but other than that, all was well. When I turned 19, I was about to move into my new home. I had been given the keys to the house and was ready to set up my furniture. After hours of carrying, I carried the final box from the removal truck into the front door and shut the door behind me. I turned to go into the kitchen and put it on the table. I opened it to see a cabinet. I took it out and walked into my new living room, placing it in the corner. I stared at it and thought to myself, I don't remember packing this cabinet. I didn't really care that much as I had just moved into my new home. I walked back into the kitchen to grab my television and brought it into the living room when I saw it. The teddy. It just sat there, staring at me with those realistic blank eyes. It was beyond imagination, like something from a horror movie. My fears could not be contained, and whatever that bear or demon possessing it was, it knew I was scared. I threw it in the garbage and put a cinder block over the lid as I slept in my bed that night, content and feeling a little more secure. I woke up that night and checked the time. 12 midnight. I heard a sound in the kitchen. I went to the kitchen and noticed that the outside door was wide open, with muddy paw tracks leading inside. I saw that one of my knives was gone from the holder, and then I heard something creeping behind me. I hightailed it to my car, and I just drove. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw its face. It was holding the knife. I slammed the brakes. It flew through the front windshield. It stood up, and it stared right into my eyes. I felt as if it was pulling me towards it. The only thing that could be coming towards it would be my 2 front wheels. I rammed into it, and I felt a slight bump. I sighed in relief and drove. Not even a minute after, I felt as if something was cutting at the bottom of my car, and then it ground to a halt. I went out to check it, and there was a slash through my fuel tank. I just ran. I ran for dear life to the nearest hotel to stay at. The only one was a mile away. I ran, and with every few feet, it felt like it was just 1 foot behind. Once I finally got to the hotel, I fell onto the bed with exhaustion. When I woke up, it was at the end of the bed. I was with 2 of my friends, Ben and Nick, on holidays when it happened. We were in an isolated part of Greece, somewhere that doesn't show up on Google Maps for some reason, traveling down a long stretch of road in our rented car in search of the next major city to party in. After initially planning on driving through the night, we accepted that we had lost our way, and it was getting too dark to continue, so we pulled into a gas station for directions on where we could stay. The old man handed us an old brochure of a nearby village and insisted that we go check it out. Since we were completely lost, we were left with no other option. Something different, we thought, but just how different, we could never have guessed. As we took the next left turn and ventured into the headlight-lit darkness. The only form of lodging out there was in remote cabins, separated far apart from each other for privacy, we guessed. The self-contained cabin had a bathroom, kitchen, queen bed, and single bed, all that we needed for just 1 night. Nick won the rock-off for the single bed, so Ben and I would be sharing. Nick snores anyway, so I was cool with that. One feature of the cabin that unnerved me, however, was the large square curtainless window that occupied the entire area of the vacant wall. It bothered me especially because night had fallen and the light was on inside, so it acted as a sort of 2-way mirror. Anyone wearing black could easily look through without being noticed. We made plans to go out that night to the village bar, have some drinks, tell stories, and see where the night takes us. We discussed that we would leave the key under the rock by the front porch, and if we were to split up, whoever came home first would leave the door open for the others to get in. "Why don't you say it louder so everyone can hear where we hide it?" Ben jokes. To which Nick found the pleasure in yelling it at the top of his lungs. Luckily, our cabin was isolated out here and there was no one close by, I thought to myself as we drove off. It was a surprisingly fun night at the bar. We had plenty of shots of the local drink, until the bar staff informed us we had drunk their stocks dry. It was cheap, though, in Greece. The next thing I knew, it was late. The bar was closing and we had lost Ben. He must have left without us, though I don't remember him telling us he was leaving. I was slightly concerned by him acting out of character. So we left without him, taking the car. I need to piss badly. I adjusted in my seat as the car headlights momentarily lit up the cabin and we turned into the driveway to the sound of gravel crunching under the tires. We checked under the rock for the key. It was gone. We tried the door handle. Locked. What the fuck? We both looked at each other. Ben must have come home before us and he's locked us out. Ben! Open up! We need to piss! Hurry up, Ben! We banged on the door. I heard a stumbling inside, like someone literally crawling, awkwardly, on all fours out of bed. Damn, he must be drunk. I can't hold this piss in anymore, I said, as Nick and I went to separate sides of the cabin to urinate as Ben finally opened the door. It felt good, but that feeling was harshly interrupted by what caught my attention on the large window, sending a large shiver up my spine. There was this long, thin set of handprints, only visible on the window from the mist outside. It looked longer than any human's hand, but much, much thinner. Holy shit! But I quickly cleared my mind of the scary and irrational images it was creating, as it was certainly just a regular human hand that had been smeared, causing the illusion that it's longer. Right? Either way, it occurred to me that someone, or something, might have been watching us. I hurriedly finished my business and rushed inside. We are not turning the light on, I thought, to prevent anything from looking in at us, as I locked the front door and we went straight to bed. Nick fell asleep instantly, snoring before his head even hit the pillow, and after a few minutes of tolerating Nick's inconsistent snore, my drooping eyes fell weary, so I closed them. But as soon as they shut, I couldn't help but get the burning feeling that Ben's eyes had opened suddenly and were staring straight at me, menacingly. My body rose in temperature and my heart beat quicker as I sensed this, as if Ben was holding his breath, vision fixated on me angrily through the darkness. Sorry if we hadn't gone home with him. Jeez, but why else would he be so angry? After a few minutes of calming myself from this irrational fear, I drifted off to sleep. Knock, knock, knock. Open up! You said you wouldn't lock it. Thud, thud, thud. It grew louder. Open the door! It's fucking cold out here! This was the single, scariest moment of my entire life, and the most paralyzing sensation swept over my entire body. It was Ben at the door. Suddenly there was a movement in the sheets next to me. Something stirring. I got up faster than I ever have in my life and ran to the door. Nick had awoken and come to the same horrific realization as soon as I did. He was right behind me and kicking the door open and fleeing outside to the car. Not once did we look back. I started the car and beckoned Ben to follow, but he didn't know what had happened. Still facing into the room, he turned on the light to see inside. This was a true story. It really happened. You can ask Nick if you don't believe me, but I wouldn't ask Ben. He doesn't say much anymore after the incident, and whenever he's questioned about that night, about what he saw, his face turns pale and expressionless, and he will immediately shut the nearest curtain. Honestly, it didn't take long. I remember a time when we all thought it was so far off that nothing like this could happen in our fragile lifetimes. Looking back, it's almost laughable. I've been spending my last few days watching videos of how things were. I found a box of DVDs with permanent marker written on them. I have no idea who the people in the videos are, but they were filled with recordings of celebrations. Birthdays, Christmas, New Year's. There was even one in the pile labeled Family Reunion. It's a bit strange to see that someone out there still put videos on DVDs. Such an old way of doing things, but if nothing else, I'm grateful. It's been a pleasant escape from existence. Of course, the nostalgia has been putting some strange thoughts in my head. How did we end up where we are? How did we get forced into this situation? Sure, these thoughts are fruitless, but I've never been one for fruit, so I decided to entertain them. I feel like most people would say that we were apathetic, and that's what brought us here. At least that's what they would say if they weren't mostly dead. And maybe they'd be right. It's not hard to get wrapped up in your own life, uncaring of how everyone else is living. Why should I care if my neighbor 2 doors down the way had a bad day and decided to drunkenly take it out on his wife? Not really my problem. Some would probably also push that it was caused by politics, the never-ending squabbling between opposite ends of the same spectrum, more like 2 sides of the same coin, but I don't think it would have made a difference. Sure, the people voted for their leaders, others voted for who they wanted. Sitting here today doesn't really feel like the end of everything was partisan. Death is indiscriminate. It doesn't care who you voted for. It doesn't care what you considered wrong or right. Ironically, so are bombs, missiles, bullets. They all just kind of do their own thing. Now, if you were to ask me, I think it was ignorance. We did all we could to steer the country, the world, in the right direction. We were charitable to some extent. There was even a brief moment when everything was set into motion where we loved our fellow man. Again, laughable. The sirens wailed, the skies lit up, the cities burned, and we wanted to help each other. By then, it was too late. Everything had been set into motion. The steps chosen to start anew were already being followed. And with those 3 simple words, we would all meet our end. With those 3 simple words, we would get what we deserved. Our penance for our apathy. Our fighting, the wars, the murder. Everything our species had ever done. It was then that we were baptized by fire. That's the problem with cutting down a tree. No one tells you how dangerous it might be. Sure, they'll warn you about falling branches and staying out of the way while the job is being done, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how the tree you're about to cut down might be the only thing standing between you and something very bad. Maybe that's the reason trees have been the object of worship throughout history. Could it be because they're extremely good at keeping things out of our world that we don't want in it? Or could it be that it wasn't the tree that was being worshipped, but rather whatever it was that the tree was keeping at bay? Unfortunately for me, the reason our ancestors started worshipping trees in the first place is something that most of us have long forgotten. Until now. I bought the house in the spring of 2009. It was on the old Kings Highway that cuts through Connecticut between New York and Boston. While it no longer qualifies as a highway by today's standards, it is still a fairly busy road. There is a nice historical marker in the front yard of the house claiming that it had been built in 1700. Of course, the previous owners, of which there were many, had made many improvements to the original house over the years, so it had an updated kitchen and bathrooms. It also has a lot of old-grown oak trees in the yard. I believe they are black oaks, but I've never been one to care that much about this oak or that oak. There was one particular tree in the back of the yard that was bigger and more majestic than any of the other ones. Its trunk must have measured 6 feet around, occupying the center of the backyard. All the other trees seemed to defer to it. A treehouse or a swing would have seemed right at home in this tree, but it had neither. There was a nice spotlight at its base that pointed up and illuminated the tree at night. Day or night, the oak was really nice to look at. And best of all, it provided excellent shade for the back deck on hot summer days. And then, it started to die. I can't really pinpoint exactly when it started to die, but in the spring of 2010, when the leaves began to come out, I noticed that a couple of the top branches stayed bare. I don't think it was cause for any immediate alarm. If they stayed bare, I'd just have them removed. So when they were still leafless in the middle of June, I hired an honest tradesman to come over and take those branches down. He and his team made quick work of it, and I didn't think anything about the fact that they broke one of their buzzsaws on the first branch they tried to cut off. I figured it was a tough old tree, and a broken buzzsaw was one of the hazards of the job. A couple of weeks later, I noticed that on some of the other branches on the top of the tree, the leaves had started to wilt and turn brown. As the wilting and dying began to spread to additional branches, I became more concerned. By the end of July, the bark on the branches where the leaves had first died began to slough off and accumulate at the base of the tree. It was time to seek professional help, so I called in an arborist. She examined the tree and quickly came to the conclusion that it was suffering from something called hypoxylon canker. And the really bad news is that there is no known cure for hypoxylon canker once the symptoms have appeared. The disease is internal and kills the sapwood of the tree. The mighty oak was going to die within months. It was shortly after getting this grim diagnosis that I noticed something else. My wire-haired dachshund Baxter had a habit of lying down at the base of the trees in my backyard. In the dog version of Hope Springs Eternal, he was convinced that a squirrel would one day be stupid enough to climb down the tree into his waiting paws, and barring that, perhaps fall out of the tree. He spent his days this way under every oak in the backyard at one time or another, except the one that was dying. At first I imagined that he would sense impending death in the dying oak, but that wasn't it. After some observation, I realized that he didn't bother lying under that tree because there were never any squirrels in it. I could see squirrels in every other tree in my backyard, but not in the dying oak. Not only that, there were no birds in the tree either. Not a single bird on any branch, regardless of whether the branch still had leaves or not. That hadn't always been the case with the dying oak. It had formerly been full of squirrels and birds. I considered it strange, but I didn't really give it too much thought. There wasn't any real logical reason why animals would avoid a particular tree. Little did I know at the time that I was right about there being no logical reason the animals would avoid a certain tree. It wasn't the dying tree the squirrels and birds were avoiding. It was something else entirely. And as the tree died, it was getting closer to getting out. Through the rest of that summer and into the fall, the tree continued to lose leaves and bark. It was apparent to anyone looking at it that it was dying. It occurred to me to have it taken down and be done with it, but I couldn't bring myself to do that. I had the weird sense that the oak was fighting back, and not simply bowing to the inevitable. If that was the case, I was going to give it every opportunity to succeed. But branch by branch, the tree continued to die until only the lowest ones had any leaves on them. By now it was October and all the oaks began to lose their leaves, so by the time all the trees were bare, I couldn't be sure whether the dying oak was gone, or it would once again sprout some leaves the following spring. The footprints appeared in March. We'd had a late winter snowfall of about 6 inches, which had tapered off in the early evening of the 20th. I remember the date only because the next day was the vernal equinox, the first day of spring. When I woke up on the morning of the 21st and looked out the back window of my bedroom, I noticed several pairs of footprints in the backyard leading up to the dying oak. The footprints then spread out around the tree in a circle at the base. I threw on some clothes and a coat and then, accompanied by Baxter, went out to investigate. I gave Baxter a brief look of reproach as we left the house, and his expression seemed to say, "Well, apparently you didn't hear anything either." It wasn't easy to determine exactly how many people had been in the backyard, but my guess was around 6. By the look of things, they had formed a circle around the tree. I didn't have any idea who they were or why they had come. It occurred to me that this may not have been the first time they had been there. The only reason I knew about this visit was the footprints in the snow. There was no other evidence that people had been there. I followed the footprints out of the backyard to see where they had originated. They dead-ended at the street in front of my house, which had been plowed earlier in the morning. So all I really knew was that a group of people had come into my backyard sometime during the night and gathered around the dying, or maybe dead, oak tree. Their purpose for the visit was a mystery to me. I decided that the best thing to do was to start leaving the spotlight at the base of the tree on all night. If they decided to make another visit, that might act as a deterrent. Soon the weather started getting warmer, and the trees in the yard began to sprout buds of new leaves. I waited anxiously to see what would happen to the dying oak. Was it dead, or did it have some life left in it yet? As the days went by, it eventually became clear to me that there would be no new leaves on the tree. It was gone. It saddened me more than I expected to see a dead tree surrounded by new life in my backyard. The sooner I had it removed, I decided, the better. In early June, I contacted the honest tradesman who earlier had removed the dead branches and asked him to come back and remove the entire tree, including the stump. I was still on the phone with the tree service looking out the back window at the tree when I first noticed what appeared to be a symbol. A symbol carved into the trunk. Making the appointment for later that week, I hung up and went out into the yard to take a closer look. Sure enough, something was carved into the tree's trunk. It was a plus sign with a circle or ring surrounding the intersection of the lines. The intersecting lines measured about 6 inches each, and the diameter of the circle was around 4 inches. I had no idea who carved it there, though. I suspected it was related to the footprints I had seen in the snow back in March. I took a picture of the carving with my phone and uploaded it to Facebook to see if any of my friends recognized what it was. Within an hour, one of them posted that it resembled a Celtic cross. Sure enough, when I compared my picture to images of other Celtic crosses I found on the web, that's exactly what it was. Specifically, the pre-Christian version before the cross morphed into the Christian cross. Now that I knew what it was time to figure out why it was carved into the tree in the first place. A little research was all it took to learn that the symbol was used by the pagan Celts as protection against evil spirits and spiritual dangers. Armed with this new knowledge, things began to fall into place, or so I thought. I came to the conclusion that some local Wiccans, Druids, whatever you want to call them, had zeroed in on my dying oak and came to the conclusion that it represented a threat in some way. That would explain the visit on the spring equinox. The oak tree played a central role in the Druid rites associated with it. You can learn a lot very quickly with the internet, and the same folks had likely been the ones to carve the Celtic cross into the trunk. I guessed that both of these actions were efforts to remove whatever threat they supposed the tree represented. My plans were a bit more modern, to just cut it down. Over the next couple of days, I noticed that the dead oak started to lean to the right. Each morning its lean was a little more pronounced. It was as if someone or something was pushing it out of the way. Baxter started to avoid going anywhere near the tree, which was interesting because I assumed the digging at the base of the tree was his work. Most of the digging was on the side of the tree, opposite from the direction in which it leaned. My mistake was to assume that something was digging into the ground at the base of the tree, rather than digging out. Frankly, it would have been difficult to tell the difference. In any case, with the lean getting worse, I grew more anxious to get the tree down. As planned, on Friday morning the tree crew showed up ready to take it down. If any of the team noticed the Celtic cross carved into the tree, they didn't mention it. They just went right to work, starting with removing the top branches first. As they worked their way down the tree, I tried to ignore the growing unease I felt. It seemed irrational, but nevertheless the feeling lingered. Around midday, the tree seemed to give a slight lurch further to the right, knocking one of the men cutting the branches off balance and causing the branch he was working on to suddenly break off. It fell to the ground and delivered a glancing blow to one of the other men. It hit him hard enough to knock him to the ground, and when he stood back up, it was obvious he had dislocated his shoulder. After the hurt worker was loaded onto one of the trucks and driven to the ER to get his arm looked at, the remaining men went back to work on the tree. By early afternoon, the only thing left was the stump. The smaller branches had been loaded into the wood chipper and chopped into small pieces. The larger branches and trunk were cut into small logs and loaded on the back of one of the trucks. They now brought in the stump grinder and turned what remained of the trunk and visible roots into a pile of wood chips that were then shoveled into the back of one of the trucks. After that, there was nothing left to do but pack up, and as they prepared to leave, I thanked them for their work. Then it was just me and Baxter in the backyard. I walked over to where the tree had once stood. I would need to put sod over the area. It was just now a few scattered wood chips and loose dirt. That was 3 days ago. A lot has happened since then. The first morning after the oak was cut down, I noticed there was a hole in the ground where it had stood. It wasn't very large, but it looked impossibly deep. Even if Baxter had the nerve to go near the spot, it wasn't a hole he could possibly have dug. The second morning, the hole was bigger and still impossibly deep. Around the edges of it was bits of fur and pieces of bone of some unidentified animal. There were also markings in the dirt that looked like it had been clawed by a very large animal. The claw marks radiated outward from the hole. I spent the rest of that day getting bags of dirt from the Home Depot and filling in the hole. Only, it never quite filled up. That was yesterday. This morning I woke up and I found the hole was back, and it was bigger than ever. There were footprints of several different people in the dirt around the hole. It wasn't like the time they had appeared in the snow. Rather, it looked as if there had been some kind of a struggle. The only other thing I found in the dirt was a necklace with a Celtic cross. The necklace was broken, but I put it in my pocket anyway. That was 12 hours ago. As it got dark, I started to hear noises coming from the backyard. Baxter didn't come back from his after-dinner trip outside, and didn't come when I called for him. I did eventually hear him start barking, and it wasn't a confident-sounding bark. Baxter sounded terrified. I'm beginning to suspect that it was never the tree that was the danger. The ceremony and the spring equinox, the Celtic cross carved into the tree, were both designed to give it the ability to continue its job as jailer, even if it died. Cutting it down was likely the last thing I should have done. And now, something has come up from underneath where the oak once stood, imprisoning it. I don't know what it is, and I don't know what it wants, but I hear it outside the house's back door. Baxter's barking stopped long ago with a strangled yelp. Maybe between the broken buzzsaw and the dislocated shoulder, the oak had been trying to tell me even a dead tree is better than no tree. I don't think I will ever know the answer to that. That's the problem with cutting down a tree. No one tells you how dangerous it might be. Sometime during the night of August 16th, 1952, the small town of Ashley, Kansas, ceased to exist. At 3:28 a.m. on August 17th, 1952, a magnitude 7.9 earthquake was measured by the United States Geological Survey. The earthquake itself was felt throughout the state and most of the Midwest. The epicenter was determined to be directly under Ashley, Kansas. When state law enforcement arrived at what should have been the outskirts of the farming community, they found a smoldering, burning fissure in the earth, measuring 1,000 yards in length and approximately 500 yards in width. The depth of the fissure was never determined. After 12 days, the statewide and local search for the missing 679 residents of Ashley, Kansas, was called off by the Kansas state government at 9:15 p.m. on the night of August 29th, 1952. All 679 residents were assumed to be dead. At 2:27 a.m. on August 30, 1952, a magnitude 7.5 earthquake was measured by the United States Geological Survey. The epicenter was situated under what used to be the location of Ashley, Kansas. When law enforcement investigated at 5:32 a.m., they reported that the fissure in the earth had closed. In the 8 days leading up to the disappearance of the town and its 679 residents, bizarre and unexplainable events were reported by dozens of residents in Ashley, Kansas, and law enforcement from the surrounding area. On the evening of August 8, 1952, at 7:13 p.m., a resident by the name of Gabriel Jonathan reported a strange sight in the sky above Ashley. The town itself, having no official branch of law enforcement called into the police station of the neighboring town of Hayes, Gabriel reported what appeared to be a small black opening in the sky. Within the next 15 minutes, the Hayes police station became overwhelmed with dozens of phone calls, all reporting the same phenomenon. The phenomenon was never reported by any neighboring communities. A decision was made to send a trooper to Ashley to investigate the matter the following morning. At 7:54 a.m., on the morning of August 9th, 1952, Hayes police officer Alan Mace radioed the Hayes police station. he reported that despite following the one-way road leading into Ashley, he had become lost. According to his report, the road continued along its normal path, but somehow ended up back in Hayes. Officer Mace went on to add that the road never curved or bent in any direction. At 9:15 a.m., 7 of the town's 10 police cars were sent to investigate the situation, and all members of the same team came to the same conclusion. The only road leading into Ashley stopped leading into Ashley, but instead led back to Hayes. Phone calls continued to pour into the Hayes police station, all reporting that the black opening in the sky continued to grow in size. All callers were advised to remain inside and to not travel outside unless absolutely necessary. At 8:17 p.m., Miss Elaine Cantor reported her neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Milton, and their 2 children, Jeffrey and Brooke, missing. According to Miss Cantor's phone call, the Miltons attempted to leave town in their family car earlier in the evening. They never returned. Law enforcement officials from Hayes never reported the car or individuals coming up the one-way road. At 7:38 a.m. on the morning of August 10th, 1952, phone calls from Ashley into the Hayes police station reported that the town was in total darkness. The sun had never risen. At 10:15 a.m., at the request of Hayes law enforcement, a helicopter from Topeka, Kansas, flew over the region in which Ashley, Kansas stood. The town was never observed from the air. At 12:43 p.m. on the afternoon of August 11th, 1952, Miss Phoebe Danielewski called into the Hayes police station. She reported that her daughter, Erica, had begun to have conversation with her father, who died 3 years prior in a drunk driving accident. To add to her concern, Miss Danielewski reported that Erica was attempting to go outside into the dark to join them. Over the course of the next 12 hours, a reported 329 phone calls were placed into the Hayes police station, all describing similar phenomenon with the children of the town. The following morning of August 12th, 1952, the situation became dire. During the middle of the night, all 217 children in the town of Ashley, Kansas, disappeared. A reported 421 phone calls were placed into the Hayes Police Department. Unable to be of any useful assistance, Hayes law enforcement instructed all callers to remain inside and to avoid any and all attempts at finding the missing children. At 5:19 p.m. on the evening of August 13th, 1952, Ashley elderly man Scott Luntz reported a growing, distant fire to the south. According to his description, the fire seemed to turn the distant black into bright red and orange that seemed to extend high into the sky. Throughout the rest of the day, calls continued in, stating that the fire, in addition to moving north, now seemed to come out of the black sky. No fire was ever witnessed by any of the neighboring communities or law enforcement officials. These reports continued until 12:09 a.m. on the morning of August 14th, 1952. The last phone call, placed by a Mr. Benjamin Endicott, reported that the fire in the sky had grown so intense that it began to appear as daytime over the town. The phone call ended abruptly. From the phone call placed by Benjamin Sherman Endicott.
Just hold on, wait. I see something. It's to the south. It looks like...
The next phone call wouldn't be placed until the following evening. The following is the entire transcript of the final phone call to be received by the Hayes Police Department out of the town of Ashley, Kansas. It was placed at 9:46 p.m. on the evening of August 15th, 1952. In this recorded phone call, The officer on duty is Officer Peter Welsh. The caller has been identified as Miss April Foster.
Hayes Police Department. Hello?
Yes, hello?
Ma'am, who am I speaking with?
My name's April Foster. Please, sir, please help me.
What is happening, ma'am?
Last night they came back.
Ma'am, I'm going to need you to...
Last night they came back.
Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down and speak clearly. What happened? Who came back?
Everyone.
Everyone.
They all came in the fire.
What do you mean, everyone?
My son. I saw my son last night. He was walking down the street. He was burned. Jesus Christ, he was burned.
Ma'am,
He died last year. I raised him since he was a baby. It was just me and him. I told him to watch for cars when he rode his bike, but he never wanted to listen.
Ma'am, what you're saying isn't making any sense. You said everyone came back.
Are you fucking listening to me? Everyone came back. Everyone who died or went missing, they're back, and they're looking for us. He said, Mommy, I'm okay now, see? I can walk again. Where are you, Mommy? I want to see you.
Ma'am, where are you now? Are you safe?
I'm hiding, just like everyone else. We saw them coming through the fields, and some people opened the doors for them. God, the screaming. I don't know what happened to them. Their houses caught fire, and they caved in. I had my curtains drawn. I'm hiding in the closet right now.
Ma'am, is everything alright? Are you okay? Ma'am?
Oh my God.
Ma'am?
Something just came in.
Stay as quiet as you can. Don't make a sound.
Mommy? He came inside.
Stay absolutely still. Don't leave.
Mommy, where are you hiding?
Stay quiet.
I found you, Mommy.
Ma'am? Ma'am?
The following morning, at 6:55 a.m., the law enforcement officials of the Hayes Police Department arrived at the location of Ashley, Kansas. A smoldering, burning fissure in the earth was all that remained. We've all felt it. You're up late, working, studying, watching a movie, reading on the computer. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It's the feeling that you get. You're tired, your eyes burn, and have the gritty feeling you get after not sleeping for a while. Okay, you can't go crawl into bed right now, but you close your eyes for a couple of minutes. Try and get a little moisture back into the eyes. That couldn't hurt anything, right? Then you're falling, like stepping off a cliff. You're in free fall, though your body isn't even moving. Then, like a bungee cord, snapping back. You're jerking awake, heart thumping a little faster, blinking quickly, wondering what just happened. Doctors call it a hypnagogic jerk. A natural reaction, they say, to your brain thinking you're dying, when your breathing and heart rate slow as you fall asleep. What the doctors don't know is, your brain is right. Every time you let yourself nod off, every time you feel that falling sensation, you're not falling. You're being pulled down. And one day, your brain won't be able to pull you back up. They will have you. I'm currently sitting in front of my computer, scared witless. Any moment now I'm going to be killed. Today, a friend of mine told me a story. His aunt had taken care of him since he was a small boy, and she told him, last night, about how his parents died. He did a very fair imitation of her. I know them pretty well. They were doing mission work in some nasty little South American country when a man burst into the mission hospital one night, terrified out of his mind. He told him that his sister had been killed by a muerta blanca, and that he was certain it was coming for him next. What is a muerta blanca? Apparently it was some sort of boogeyman, something like that dumb chupacabra or whatever. They called it the White Death, or the White Girl, because it was the soul of someone who hated life so much that they came back in their shrouds to kill those who told of them. The man had been told about this vengeful spirit by his sister hours before her death. It was a girl with dead, black eyes that wept bile. The thing moved without ever actually moving its legs, and it stalked its victims back to their homes. Now, if you weren't already aware that this thing was following you, once it got back to your house, it would start knocking on your door, once for your skin, which she'll use to patch her own decaying flesh, twice for your muscle, which she'll gnash her teeth on between victims, thrice for your bones, which she'll make knives to pick her teeth and kill her victims, 4 times for your heart, which she'll wear around her neck, 5 times for your teeth, which she'll polish and keep in a box, 6 times for your eyes, which she'll see the faces of your loved ones through, 7 times for your soul, which she'll eat whole. You can never pass while you're in her stomach. She has to repeat this on any mirror or door between you and her. You can try to outrun her, but she's faster than the fastest man, and if you leave your home while she's knocking on your door, she won't be so courteous when she catches up to you. Now the man was certain this thing had killed his sister, that he had tried to tell the police but they wouldn't listen. Next he had tried to tell his priest, but the priest turned him away when he saw that the thing was following him now. Oh, that's right, I forgot about that. It can only get you if you tell someone else about it, or you saw it kill someone else. The man, after finishing his tale, stole a car from the mission and was never seen again. Apparently his mother and father had immediately called his aunt about this when it happened. They were found in the morning, skinned and dismembered. Their bodies were covered in tiny childlike handprints. His aunt was really drunk the night before, and had told him about that. He told me this story early in the morning today at school, before the cops arrived. His aunt had been murdered that night. I called him later that night and he told me that he was being chased by someone, and now they were knocking on his door. I told him to stop shitting me. He held the phone away from his face for a minute and I could hear slow, deliberate knocking. A moment later, I heard the door rip from its hinges and the dying screams of my friend. Then, a little girl's voice spoke over the line. "Witness." I hung up. 3 minutes ago, someone started knocking on my door. She has to knock 28 times on my front door, 28 times on the mirror in the hall, and another 28 times on the door to my bedroom. She's doing it slowly. I think she wants to scare me some more, let me know that my death is just moments away. I will not run. I couldn't get to my car in time anyway. She started knocking on my bedroom door a minute ago. She should be done any moment. Nice knowing you guys. It's been fun. I'm a total Sonic the Hedgehog fan, much like everyone else. I like the newer games, but I don't mind playing the classics. I don't think I've ever played glitchy or hacked games before, though I don't think I want to play any after the experience I had. It started on a nice summer afternoon. I was playing Sonic Unleashed. I liked how you get to explore the towns in it. until I noticed, out of my peripheral vision, that the mailman had arrived and put something in my mailbox as usual and left. I paused my game to go see what I got in the mail. The only thing in the mailbox was a CD case for computers and a note. I took it inside. I looked at the note first and realized it was from my dear friend Kyle, let's just call him that, whom I hadn't heard from in 2 weeks. I know that because I recognized his handwriting, though what was weird is how it looked. It looked badly written, and scratchy and somewhat difficult to read, as if Kyle was having a hard time writing it down, or did it in a hurry. This is what he wrote. "Tom, I can't take it anymore. I had to get rid of this thing somehow before it was too late, and I was hoping you'd do it for me. I can't do it. He's after me. And if you don't destroy this CD, he'll come after you too. He's too fast for me. Please, Tom, destroy this godforsaken disc before he comes after you too. And it's too late for me. Destroy the disc, and you'll destroy him. But do it quick, otherwise he'll catch you. Don't even play the game. It's what he wants. Just destroy it. Please. Kyle." Well, that was certainly weird. Even though Kyle is my best friend and I haven't seen him in 2 weeks, I didn't do what he asked me. I didn't think that a simple gaming disc would do anything bad to him after all. It's just a game, right? Boy, was I wrong about that. Anyway, I looked at the disc and it looks like any other ordinary computer CDR disc, except that it had black marker written on it, Sonic.exe. And this was much unlike Kyle's handwriting, meaning that he must have gotten it from someone else, like a pawn shop or eBay. When I saw Sonic on the writing of the disc, I was actually excited and wanted to play it since, I'm a big Sonic fan. I went right up to my room, turned on my computer, put the disc in, and installed the game. When the title screen popped up, I noticed that it was the first Sonic game. I was like, awesome, because, like I said earlier, I like the classics. The first thing I noticed was out of place. When I pressed start, there's a split second when I saw the title image turned into something much different. Something that I now consider horrifying, before cutting to black. I remember what the image looked like in that split second before the game cut to black. The sky had darkened. The title emblem was rusted and ruined. The Sega 1991 was now instead Sega 666. Water had turned red, like blood, except it looked hyper-realistic. But the freakiest thing was in that split-second frame was Sonic. His eyes were pitch black and bleeding, with 2 glowing red dots staring right at me. And his smile had stretched wider up to the edge of his face. I was rather disturbed about that image when I first saw it, though I figured that it was just a glitch or something and I forgot about it. After it cut to black, it stayed like that for about 10 seconds or so. And then another weird thing happened. The save file select from Sonic the Hedgehog 3 popped up. And I was like, what the fuck? What's this doing in the first Sonic game? Anyway, then I noticed something off. The background was the dark cloudy sky of the bad Stardust Speedway level from Sonic CD, and there were only 3 save files. The music was that creepy Caverns of Winter music from Earthbound, only it was extended and seemed to have been in reverse. And the image for the save file where you see a preview of the level you're on is just red static for all 3 files. What freaked me out more was the character select. It showed only Tails, Knuckles, and, to my surprise, Dr. Robotnik. Now I was sure that something was up. I mean, how could you play as Robotnik in a classic Sonic game, for crying out loud? That's when I realized this wasn't just a glitchy game. It was a hacked game. Yeah, it definitely looked hacked. It was really creepy, but as a smart gamer I wasn't scared. Or at least I tried not to be. I told myself that it was just a hacked game, and that there's nothing wrong with that. Anyways, shaking off the creeped out feeling, I picked File 1, chose Tails, and got started. The game froze for about 5 seconds, and I heard a creepy, pixelated laugh that sounded an awful lot like that Kefka guy from Final Fantasy before cutting to black. The screen stayed black for about 10 seconds or more. Then it showed the typical level title thing, except the simplistic shapes were different shades of red, and the text showed only Hill, Act 1. The screen faded in, and the level title vanished, revealing Tails in the Green Hill Zone from Sonic 1. The music was different, though. It sounded like a peaceful melody in reverse. Anyway, I started playing, and had Tails start running like you would in any of the classic Sonic games. What was odd was that, as Tails was running along the level, there was nothing but flat ground, and a few trees for 5 minutes. That was when the peaceful music started to lower down into slow and deep tones, very slowly, as I kept going. I suddenly saw something, and I stopped to see what it was. It was one of the small animals, lying dead on the ground, bleeding, and that was when the music started to slow down. Tails had a shocked and saddened look on his face that I never saw him have before, so I just had to move along. But he kept that worried look on his face. As he kept moving, I saw more dead animals. As Tails moved past them, looking more and more worried as the music lowered, and he moves past more dead animals, I was shocked to see how they were all dead. They looked like somebody killed them in rather gruesome ways. A squirrel was hanged on a tree with what appeared to be his entrails hanging out. A bunny had all 4 of his limbs torn off, and a duck had his eyes gouged out and his throat slit. I felt sick to my stomach when I saw this massacre, and apparently so did Tails. After a few more seconds, there were no more animals, and the music seemed to have stopped. I still kept Tails to continue. A minute or so after the music stopped, Tails was running up a hill, but then he stopped, and I saw why. Sonic was there, on the other side of the screen, with his back against Tails, with his eyes closed. Tails looked happy to see Sonic, but then his smile faltered, obviously noticing that Sonic wasn't responding to him, if not acting as if he was totally oblivious of Tails' presence. Tails walked slowly towards Sonic, and I noticed that I wasn't even moving my keyboard to make him move. So, this had to have been a cutscene? Suddenly, I began to have a growing feeling of dread as Tails walked closer to Sonic to get his attention. I felt that Tails was in danger and something bad was going to happen. I heard faint static growing louder as Tails was but inches away from Sonic, and he stopped and stuck his hand out to touch him. That foreboding feeling in my gut was growing stronger, and I felt the urge to tell Tails to get away from Sonic as the static grew louder. Suddenly, in a split second, I saw Sonic's eyes open, and they were black, with those red glowing dots just like that title image, though there wasn't a smile. When that happened, the screen turned black, and the static sound stopped. It stayed black for about 7 seconds, and then white text appeared, forming a message, saying,
Hello. Do you want to play with me?
At this point I was creeped out. I didn't want to continue with this game, but my curiosity got the better of me when I was taken to a different level, with the level title now saying, Hide and Seek. This time I was in the Angel Island level from Sonic 3, and it looked like everything was on fire. Tails looked as though he was scared out of his wits this time. He actually looked at me and made frantic gestures to me as if he wanted to get out of the area he was in as fast as possible. I was starting to get freaked out by this. I mean, Tails was actually breaking the fourth wall, trying to tell me to get him out of there. So I pressed down on the arrow key as hard as I could, and made him run as fast as he could. A pixelated version of that creepy theme when you meet Shadow at the Ark as Robotnik from SA2 was playing as I made Tails trek through the desolate forest, trying to help him escape from whatever he was trying to run from. Suddenly, I heard that creepy laugh again, that awful Kefka laugh. Right after 10 seconds had passed, I helped Tails run through the forest, and then I started seeing flashes of Sonic popping everywhere on the screen. again with those black and red eyes. The music changed to that suspenseful drowning jingle as I see Sonic behind Tails, slowly gaining up on him, flying. Sonic wasn't running, he was actually flying. The flying pose his sprite was making looked very similar to Metal Sonic's flying pose in Sonic CD, except it was just Sonic, and he had the black and red eyes again, only this time he had the most deranged looking grin on his face. He looked as though he was enjoying the torment he was giving the poor little fox as he gained up on him. Suddenly, when Tails tripped, another cutscene, the music stopped, and Sonic vanished. Tails laid there, and just started crying for about 15 seconds. The scene was rather upsetting to watch, and I kind of teared up myself. But then Sonic appeared, right in front of Tails, as he looked up in horror. Blood started to come down those blackened eyes of Sonic's as a grin slowly grew from his face. As he looked down at the horrified fox, I could do nothing but watch. Just in a split second, Sonic lunged at Tails right before the screen went black. There was a loud screeching noise that only lasted 5 seconds. The text returned, only at this time it said,
"You're too slow. Want to try again?"
And then that god-awful laugh came with it. I was so shocked by what had happened. Did Sonic murder Tails? No, he couldn't have. He and Tails are supposed to be best friends, right? Why did Sonic do that to him? I shook the shock off as I was brought back to the character select. The save file that had Tails in it was different. Tails was no longer in the box itself, but in the TV screen, which was flickering with that red static. Tails' expression scared me. His eyes were black and bleeding. His orange fur had gone black, and he had an expression of anguish on his face. Trying to ignore it, I picked Knuckles next. The laugh came again, then the screen cut to black, and stayed there for another 10 seconds. This time the level said, "You can't run." I was really freaked out by now. I couldn't really tell if this was a glitch, or a hack, or some kind of sick, twisted joke. Or anything, really. But despite my fear of what happened, I kept playing. The next level looked much different. It had the ground as the scrap brain zone, but the sky background looked like the main menu. It had the dark and reddish cloudy sky, but it was the music that creeped me out the most. It sounded like Gygas's theme, right after you beat Pokey in Earthbound. I also noticed that Knuckles looked afraid, just like Tails did, though not as much. More rather, he looked a little unnerved. He broke the fourth wall just like Tails and looked as if he wasn't sure about going on, but I made him move anyway. He ran down the straight pathway in this dark level, and as he did, the screen started to flicker red static a couple of times. And then that maddening laugh came by again. After a few seconds of running, I noticed several blood stains on the metallic ground. I felt a growing sense of fear again, thinking that something horrible is going to happen to Knuckles. He looked nauseated walking down this blood-stained road, but I still kept him going. Suddenly, as Knuckles ran, Sonic appeared right in front of him with those black and red eyes, and then red static appeared again. When the static vanished, it showed nothing but a black screen with some text saying,
"Found you."
I was scared now. Sonic found Knuckles already? What was going on? Red static came again, and then I was back to the level. Knuckles looking like he was panicking, and Sonic was nowhere to be seen. This time, that high-pitched squealing from the Silent Hill 1's final boss was playing. Was this some kind of boss battle with Sonic? I hope to God it wasn't, honestly. Suddenly, Sonic appeared right behind Knuckles in what appeared to be pixelated black smoke. I made Knuckles turn and then punch Sonic, but he vanished. In that same black pixelated smoke before I could even land a hit, that terrible laugh went off again. He appeared behind Knuckles, and then I made him punch again, and Sonic again vanished, laughing. Knuckles was panicking even more, and even I felt like I was going a little crazy. Sonic was practically playing with us. He was playing a sick, twisted little mind game with me and Knuckles. Another cutscene played as Knuckles fell to his knees and clutched his head, sobbing. I felt his agony. Sonic was actually driving us both crazy. And then in a split second, Sonic lunged at Knuckles. The screen went black, with another distorted screeching noise that lasted for at least 3 seconds. Another text message appeared.
So many souls to play with. So little time. Would you agree?
What the hell? Just, what is going on? I started to think Sonic was actually trying to talk to me through the game, but I was too scared to actually properly think that. I was brought back to the main menu, and this time the second file box had Knuckles in the TV screen. His red fur had darkened to a reddish gray, his dreadlocks were dripping with blood, and his eyes were black and bleeding too, and he had a look of sadness on his face. I began to think that those are the actual characters trapped in those TV screens in the save files, but I couldn't believe it. Or maybe I just didn't want to believe it. So, I shut off the game. I shut off the game and I took a break. I took a nap. But I wish I hadn't. Because, I began to have the most disturbing nightmare. I was in pitch black darkness, though I was under the light given off by a lamp that hung high above my head. I could hear the cries of Knuckles and Tails nearby. They were saying stuff like, "Help us," and "Why did you give us to him?" and "Run away, before he gets you too." Their cries died out as I then heard Sonic laugh. His laugh, it still sounded a lot like the distorted Kefka laugh.
You're a lot of fun to play with, kid. Just like your friend, Kyle. Though he didn't last long.
I was scared and looking around for the source of the voice.
Won't be long now until you join him and all my other friends.
I saw him walking toward me, flickering in and out in several directions.
You can't run, kid. You're in my world now. Just like the others.
When he grabbed me, and I saw his bleeding, black and red-eyed, grinning face, I woke up with a fright. After a couple of hours, I decided to continue playing the game. I don't know why, but I had to know. I had to figure out why this was happening, so I turned on the computer, went straight to the game, and selected Robotnik next. I still thought that was wacky, playing as Robotnik, but anyway, the level title appeared again, and this time, all it said was ... which I found really freaky. This time I was in some kind of hallway. Didn't really look like it was from any of the classic Sonic games, though it has the pixelated style. The floor was shiny and checkered, the walls were a dark grayish purple with animated candle lights, and a few dark bloodstains here and there. And there was a dark red curtain hanging above on the top part of the screen. Every 12 seconds or so that red curtain sways, very slowly, but whenever you're playing the game you can barely see it move. The music was oddly pleasant, a piano playing a rather sad yet peaceful song, but I knew better. This was the song that played in Hill, Act 1, only it wasn't in reverse. Robotnik didn't look entirely nervous like Tails and Knuckles did, but he did have a suspicious look on his face, as if he was just a bit paranoid. He did a little animation when I just left him standing. He turns his head to the left, and then to the right, at least twice, and then shrugs at me, as if he has no idea where he was or what was even going on. Even though I was scared out of my mind about what was going to happen, I had Robotnik continue onward. He did his usual running animation, you know, when you've beaten him at the end of a classic Sonic game and you chase him, as we continued going through the hallway. I stopped at a long flight of stairs leading downward. Now I was nervous. Even Robotnik seemed unsure of himself, though I pressed onward. As I led Robotnik down the stairs, I noticed that the walls have gotten darker and more reddish, The red torches are now an eerie blue. We landed onto another hallway. This one was longer than the last one, or at least it felt like it, and then we headed another flight of stairs down. This one was much longer. It took at least 1 full minute. And then I heard that horrid Kefka laugh again, the music slowly fading until it was quiet. As it did, the walls turned more dark red, and the torches were a black flame now. When Robotnik landed onto the third hallway, I noticed he now looked really creeped out, though he tried to hide it. I couldn't blame him, I was scared too. Suddenly, Sonic popped right in front of Robotnik the same way he did to Knuckles, and then red static. The red static lasted for about 15 seconds, and then it showed me a most unpleasant image. The image showed a hyper-realistic drawing of Sonic standing in the darkness where you can only see his face while his head and torso faded into black. And when I say hyper-realistic, I mean like he looked so real you could actually see the lines in his blue fur, as if you could actually feel it if you touched the screen. His face. Oh God. He had the most horrifying smile I had ever seen. And that's saying something considering I saw that image at the start of the game. His eyes are wide and black, and once again crying blood, which also looked hyper-realistic. And there were 2 small glowing red dots in those black eyes just staring right at me, as if staring into my mind. His grin was wide and demonic. It literally stretched to the sides of his face like a Cheshire cat, except Sonic had fangs, very sharp fangs, much like the werehog's teeth, except more vicious looking, somewhat yellowish, and from the look of it, he had stains of blood, small bits of flesh on his lips and fangs as if he just ate some animal. I stared at that gruesome image for a good 30 seconds, never taking my eyes off of it. I felt as if he was actually looking at me, smiling at me. That face. It just took 10 seconds for it to etch itself into my brain for good. Then the screen flickered with red static again 3 times, and on the 3rd time, I heard the Kefka laugh, except this time it sounded even more distorted, demonic even. It went back to the image again, except this time there was the text again, though it was messed up. But it was pretty much one of the most horrifying things I looked at since I had this game.
I am God.
It was when I read that message while looking at Sonic, when it hit me, I realized, right there and then, this Sonic was a monster. A pure evil, sadistic, all-powerful, nightmarish, demented monster. And all of his victims, including Tails, Knuckles, Robotnik, and Kyle, are just his little toys, and this game is the very gateway into his chaotic, nightmarish world and the very hell his victims are trapped in. But suddenly, in an actual split second, I screamed as Sonic lunged at the screen, screeching loudly with his mouth wide open to an unnatural length, revealing nothing but a literally spiraling abyss of pure darkness, before the red static came again. This time much louder and distorted, so loud that it hurt my ears. I yelled and grabbed my ears as the red static screeched for a good 7 seconds. And then it stopped, and showed nothing but black screen. As I sat there just staring, one last text came up.
Ready for round 2, Tom?
The Kefka laugh, now sounding more clear, as if Sonic was right behind me, played again, 3 times, as I looked at that text in shock and confusion. I was booted back to the main menu, and this time, the 3rd save file had a TV image of Robotnik in the same tormented state as Tails and Knuckles. Robotnik's skin turned a dull gray, his mustache drooped and had blackened, his glasses broke, and blood was coming from them. And he had a mere dead-like expression on his face. I looked at Tails, Knuckles, and Robotnik, and I cried a bit. I pitied them for the agony they're going through. They were forever trapped within the game, forever tormented by that horrid hedgehog, and they always will be. The computer just shut itself off then. I couldn't turn it back on no matter what I did. I just sat there for a while, horrified by what had just happened. This Sonic was the very embodiment of evil. He tortures people who play his game in more ways than one, and then when he gets bored, he drags you into the game, literally drags you to hell, where he can play with you always, as his toy. I can't get this game out of my computer. I think it's stuck in there. But at least I managed to turn it back on now. After I had sat there for a while, I heard a voice right behind me, in real life, like a whisper.
Try to keep this interesting for me, Tom.
I turned around to see where the voice came from, and what I saw made me scream. Sitting on my bed, staring right at me, was a Sonic plushie, smiling, with blood stains under its eyes. My neighbor, Mr. White, is usually a quiet old man, spending his days in a rocking chair on his porch, watching the city and his life pass by. However, to say that he's odd would be an understatement. He dresses from head to toe in solid black clothes. The few times I've talked to him, he seemed like a nice guy, a little standoffish perhaps. Nothing to indicate why he dresses in all the flamboyant colors of a chimney sweep. It was the first day in August when the screaming began. 1 a.m. sharp in the morning. A horrible scream pierces the thin wall between our flats. As suddenly as it started, it stops, leaving my heart hammering and my mind awake. This continues for the rest of the week, but each time I make up my mind to confront him about it, the screaming stops and I lose the nerve to knock on his door. The next day, he's out on the front porch again, dressed in his usual black attire. Black shoes up to black socks, pants, jacket, shirt, glasses, and finally hat. "Good morning," he mumbles as I pass. I almost stop and ask him about the past few nights, but the way he rocks back and forth on his chair, his head pointed straight ahead of him, I'm still too weirded out to talk to him about it. I got back that evening to see him take off in an airport shuttle. Now, I haven't seen Mr. White leave his house in the 2 years I've lived next to him, but I figure his sudden departure simply means it'll be that much easier for me to get some sleep. Unfortunately, as soon as I get settled down into bed, I hear a new noise, a noise I hadn't noticed earlier. My bed lies against our adjoining wall, so I can hear water running in the pipes whenever he has the faucet on. As I lie there, I can hear water rushing. 2 hours and no sleep later, I realize that the noise from the pipes is even more disruptive than the screaming. I figure I'll do us both a service and shut the running faucet off. So I dress, grab a few supplies, and head over to his door. I've lost my keys enough times to figure out how to jimmy a lock, so I shove a couple of paper clips into the doorknob and wriggle them around a bit. Soon enough, I hear that soft click, and I enter his flat. The place is in shambles, like somebody had been running around knocking everything over. Books and magazines litter the floor, and half the furniture has been knocked over and shoved against a wall. I head toward the sound of running water and enter Mr. White's bathroom. Blood everywhere. The walls are covered in blood, the bathtub has blood running down into it, and the edges of the sink have bits of bloody hair and flesh around the edges. I turn off the faucet and then turn myself to get the fuck out of there. And that's when the fucking lights go out. Pop go the bulbs in the bathroom. I flip out and bolt out of there. That's when I made the mistake of looking behind me. From the gloom of the bathroom, I see that there's something watching me, its eyes reflecting some unknown light. I don't really remember the next minute, but the next thing I know, I'm standing in my own bathroom, in my own apartment. My pants heavy with my own piss. Shit. Some fucking shiny thing in the bathroom looks like eyeballs, and I piss myself. I take a shower, and then go back to my bedroom to grab some new pants. As I'm putting them on, I look out the window. It's fucking watching me, its eyes aglow in the darkness outside. I scream and almost ruin my second pair, but a moment later, they're gone. I call myself a dumbass for falling victim to my own imagination, and I go to the living room. Sleep's out of the question, but maybe I can kill my fear with some horrible late-night television. So, everything's cool for the first hour and a half, then commercial comes on where the background is black. You know how sometimes you can see a reflection on the TV when the screen is dark enough? Well, I see me, but I also see the fucking eyes glowing at me from the darkness behind my couch. Frozen to my seat, I watch them watch me. Never moving, never blinking. The beast in the shadows has me steady in its gaze. I snap out of it suddenly, doing a half flip, half barrel roll away from the couch and onto the floor. Of course, when I look again, they're gone. This shit's too crazy for me. My last bastion of defense lies in my copious alcohol collection. Practically sprinting to the kitchen, I grab a bottle of something strong, and I fill the glass. I raise the glass over my lips and above my head until it's empty. But there's something else in the bottom of the glass. I see those fucking eyes again. I slam the glass down and catch a glimmer of light as the beast takes off down my dark hallway. Shit. 5 minutes later, all the lights in the house are on, and I'm decked out in a flashlight and a kitchen knife. Well, I should say all the lights are on, but one. The hallway light died as I tried to flip it on. At the end of the dark hallway lie two doors. A closet and a door out of my apartment. It's time to get there or die trying. I creep down into the increasingly dark corridor, my flashlight and knife a foot in front of me. The goddamn closet door is open. I think I see the beast's eyes again as I near the closet, but it's just the latch on the door. I reach the closet door. Breathless, I pull the knife back and get ready to strike. Ha! Is my battle cry as I turn the corner. Nothing. No beast, and no beastly eyes. I close the closet and continue to the front door, resolute in my escape. That's when I notice another thing wrong. The outside light usually seeps in through the crack under my door. Fuck. So close, and more shit happens. Playing it safe, I edge up to the door and peer out the eyepiece. Two glowing eyes look back at me. I scream for the third time that night and go running back up the hallway to the light of the living room, leaving the knife and my only flashlight lying by the front door. There's no escape. I get ready to barricade myself in a corner. I grab the TV cabinet and began to push it toward the center of the room. It's watching me. The space between the wall and the cabinet. 3 fucking inches wide. The beast's eyes glare at me. Its gaze is neither malevolent nor friendly. Just 2 perfectly round, shining orbs. That's it. I'm done. I collapse backwards onto the floor and back away to the wall, watching the eyes. Watching the eyes watching me. Watching the eyes watching me, watching it. I sit there, staring. They don't move, nor do I. The night creeps by second after second, me caught in this horribly twisted staring contest. I just wish I knew what they wanted. If the beast attacked me, if it revealed itself, I could know what I'm up against. I might even figure out how I'll die before it kills me. No, it stays in the crack between my wall and my TV and watches with infinite patience. The darkness outside dissolves into a gray morning, and the eyes begin to lose their glimmer. As the sun lights my living room, the beast retreats, gone into the shadow it came from. To where? I have no fucking idea. I pack my things. I'm going away. Fuck knows where, but I'm getting at least 1,000 miles between me and here before night falls again. 2 shots of bourbon wish me on my way as I grab my suitcase and set off for the front door. Knock, knock. Someone got there first. I jump, dropping my stuff and getting ready to bolt back to the nearest corner. Knock, knock. But reason grabs me by the heels, whispering in my ear that the fucking night monster wouldn't be courteous enough to knock before killing me. Slowly, I open it. Mr. White is standing there. In his black hat, sunglasses, shirt, jacket, pants, socks, and shoes. "Good morning, Stephen," he says. Hi," I replied. "Say, Stephen, did anyone go into my apartment while I was gone? There are footprints leading from my bathroom to my door." Notice he neglects to mention what the footprints are formed of. No, Mr. White, I've been in my apartment all night, and I didn't hear anything." If you think I'm about to admit to a man who has blood all over his bathroom and a monster living in his house that I broke into that house, then you are very mistaken. "That's good, Stephen. I have many fragile belongings that could easily be destroyed or stolen by a malicious soul. You have a good day." You too, man." He turns to leave, and then turns back to me, smiling. "Oh, and Stephen," he says, "I couldn't help but notice bloody footprints leading from my door to yours." His smile gets even wider. He leans in, bringing our faces right next to each other. He removes his sunglasses, revealing 2 empty pits in his face. "I'll be keeping my eyes on you."
The library. That's where I am. I look around one last time. One thing sticks out. There's no people. It's vacant of life. My feet start moving. The sound echoes, covering the library and the remnants of my steps. I stop in the middle of 2 shelves, and my footsteps halt. I hear crying. The lights start flickering, giving the room an ominous feel. My heart pounds. I grow frantic and start running. I want to get out. Then I see her. The sobbing girl. She's wearing a light yellow dress. I creep toward her, reaching my hand towards her shoulder. She turns around swiftly and startles me with her sudden shift in motion. Where am I?" she quivers. "I don't know," I reply, and she cries harder than before and asks me a question. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she sniffles. "What about you?" "I'm Mia," I answer. The tears fade onto the floor and the frown turns into a smile as she shows me her hand. I grasp it and we start walking. All of my thoughts and fears dissipate as she grins. "Read me a story." She smiles. I look around, but there's no children's books. Only books that have 100 or so more pages. I look around some more, but no children's books. "Sorry," I say. "I can't find a book for you." "What about there?" She points me in a direction, and there it is. A single picture book sticking out like a sore thumb. I grab it and open it. Suddenly the room shakes, and my concern shifts to one thing: Sarah. But her eyes don't show fear. They're pure black. Spinning so dizzying. I throw up as her footsteps echo. And despite the sound, I can still hear my own breathing. I sob loudly as she reaches me. She giggles. A giggle so high-pitched that it feels like someone's stabbing my ears, and it summons a ringing sensation. The images around me fuzz into unrecognizable blobs until I can't see. Pitch black, not knowing what she's going to do next. My heart beats out of my chest. I can't hear her. I can't see her. But I can feel her hand, cold and lifeless. What is she doing? The thought drives me to hysterics as I begin to twitch and writhe in an attempt to escape, but to no avail. I'm at her mercy. She's going to kill me. A burning sensation surges through my body, followed by tingling. That's the only way to describe it. The feelings fade. The hand is gone. I'm not dead, but I feel different. My heart's not pounding. I feel cold, and yet I can move all of my limbs. My vision begins to return. First a blob, but then back to its crystal clear state. Sarah is clear in my vision. "Now you can play with me," she says, as I begin to realize what I've become.
Last night, I dreamed I was at my own funeral. I've been having this dream almost every night for the last year. It's such a surreal feeling, seeing the people you love mourn losing you. At the same time, it's also kind of nice knowing that these people care so much about my existence. Obviously, having this kind of dream would be mildly unsettling to most, but I see it as an opportunity to know that when things come to an end, people will actually care. As of late, though, there's been a disturbing part of the dream. I keep seeing this person that I don't recognize. He stands among my friends and family and just seems to loom the entirety of the service. For some reason, I can't place a name to his face, but I can feel that something is off about him. A couple times I've seen him, he always seems to target someone in the crowd and approaches them to console them. He seems so very gentle with them, but when I see his eyes, they seem to have a faint hue, a slight red glow, as he stares at where I lie in my coffin. Now, I know most people would say that it's nothing more than a dream, but I've watched him approach two people in this dream. Both people that he's approached have ended up getting into horrible accidents. One of them passed away. The other will never walk or speak again. I know that it's just a dream, but how could it be a coincidence that the two people the man approached in my dream both ended up where they are? There's only so much that you can equate to random chance. Last night, I dreamed I was at my own funeral again, and the man was there. He was there during the entirety of the service. But this time he did something different. He requested to give my eulogy. He stood in front of the entire crowd of people and spoke to them, comforting them and telling them that I was in a better place. This morning, I received a call that my parents and my younger sister were hit by a drunk driver. None of them survived. I saw a news report that there was a fire at a local college in the dorm where a number of my friends stayed. My girlfriend's mother called me this morning to tell me that she had taken her own life the night before. All of them were gone, comforted by his words and lulled into the afterlife. Now, I'm sitting here and waiting my turn. You see, at the end of my dream, after the eulogy, he turned to look at my body in my coffin. He ran a hand through my hair and told me that everything would be okay. His words were comforting, and I felt calm as I watched his glowing eyes pierce my soul. You want to hear what I have to say? Yes? Well, there's not a lot to tell. People would say that every person is different, that every person is unique. Certainly they would claim there is a difference between you and me. But think about it. What is the difference? We're all very much alike, really. I'd like to think of ourselves as a lock. We are always hiding something. But when somebody says something, somebody does something, well, we snap. That lock breaks, and whatever we're hiding comes out. Now, look at yourself. Are you any different? There's a part of you that wants that lock broken. You want an excuse to do those things, to say those things. You probably think I'm crazy, right? but maybe you just need to understand where I'm coming from. Maybe you won't be inspired to do things I do. But at least take a moment and listen to what I had to say. I remember a time when I didn't know what my lock was, nor did I care. It was back in elementary school, if I recall correctly. I moved recently and I just wanted to make a few friends. I made a whopping one, and we were great friends, him and I. Everyone else, well, they hated me. I don't know what was so wrong with me back then. All I wanted to do was cry, and cry, and cry. I had that single friend, and his friends, only there to comfort me. Everyone else seemingly thought I was the perfect kid to pick on. I was. I remember in 6th grade, I thought if I acted tough, I could get them off my back. I threatened with violence and I would stop my punches in their faces to prove a point. I got sent to the office quite a few times, but deep down inside, it only made the pain worse. I wasn't being made fun of anymore, it was worse. I was ignored altogether, ostracized, and now the only classmates that cared about me, besides my friend, only gave me pitying, fake smiles, and lies. I took their lies to heart. I wanted to feel accepted by the class as a whole. That was the mistake I made, I guess, looking back on it now. In junior high, it only got worse. Granted, I had a few more friends, but that was only a few. I felt I was doing something wrong if everyone else hated me. I didn't want to look like the bad guy. You have to understand, I was a good person. I didn't deserve any of that. That was actually when I first realized what was happening. Before I knew it, I spent less time with my friends, more time alone, thinking about everything I hated, everyone that I hated. The sickest part was that there was a part of me that wanted this, to hurt myself, until I forced myself to do something bad, something violent, and maybe they would see that I was the victim, that somehow this was all caused because nobody liked me anymore and I just wanted a voice. I couldn't help it. As months passed by, I lost the urge to hang out with those friends, and rather I'd walk down the school halls, hoping someone would try and bully me so I had an excuse to do something bad. I wanted that lock to be broken. Don't you get it? Eventually, I started thinking about exactly what I should do. If I just got into a fight at school, it wouldn't get enough attention. No. I needed to shed light on the injustice that was brought upon me. I didn't figure out that later, I brought all that pain onto myself. One day, I brought a knife with me to school. It wasn't like a kitchen knife. It was foldable and came with all kinds of other tools. That day, I knew was the day to bring justice. Or so I thought. It was during lunch, outside of the school by the portables. I was walking around and a group of kids came to me. Hey, kid. You can't just keep walking around like you want to cause trouble. I felt that this was the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard of in my entire life. Oh? And why not? What are you going to do, huh? The kid started cracking his knuckles, his cold eyes staring into me. Well, if you want it so badly, I'm sure I can't get in trouble for giving you some. Well, what are you waiting for? I couldn't help but make a wide grin on my face, but that soon was wiped off from a right hook to the jaw. I stumbled back a few steps and fell onto my knees, hunched over the ground while feeling my sore jaw. Oh, wow. That felt great. Why don't you hit me again? The kid didn't even smile. Gladly. And he kicked me in the chest. I fell on my back and was painfully gasping for air from being winded. I was sprawled on the concrete staring at the sky for a short while. I found that grin on my face again. Man, that sure was a kick, wasn't it? Give me a moment to get up, will ya? Sure. Eventually I did get up, and I felt great. I knew at the next move he'll make, I'll take my knife and end the scumbag's life. When I stood up, I pulled out that knife, flipped it out, and held it behind my back. Alright, hey, why don't you try hitting me again? I'm only here to make you feel nice." He approached me and took a swing with his left hand. I cupped his fist with my left hand and swung the knife in my right hand to the back of his arm, right above the elbow. He kicked me back with my knife being yanked out of his arm and started screaming at the wounds. All the while his friends just stood and watched. "Oh, come on, cheer up, pal," I said with that sick smile on my face as I slowly approached him. "I mean, really, we can't have you making all that noise." I rushed at him, grabbed his chin, and slashed his throat. He fell over, blood draining into his clothes. "Try screaming now, kiddo." "Oh, you can't. How does it feel?" One of his friends pile-drived me to the floor. He got on top of me and started punching my face in. I plunged my knife into his side and tried grabbing the knife, but I pulled it out and drove it into his neck, pulled the knife down into his collarbone. I got back up and stared at the other two kids. "Do you guys even know how to fight? Seriously, you're wasting my time." That was when they both ran at me. I quickly threw a knife into one's stomach. I ran an uppercut into the other kid's gut, and when he went down, I put my foot on his elbow and pulled his arm until it broke. I went to the other kid, who I threw the knife at. He was on the ground trying to take the knife out of his gut. I happily yanked it out. "Glad I could help. I'm sorry I missed, though," and drove the knife into his eye. I left them to die where they were. I was approaching the door to the school whenever another kid came out. I shoved her against the wall and stuck my knife in her face. "What do you think you're doing?" she said. At that I chuckled as I plunged my knife into her heart. Oh, the look on her face. That moment I told her, "Oh, what am I doing? Since when did you start caring about anything about me? How does it feel to hurt, huh? Huh?" I twisted the knife and watched her bleed to death. I then took the knife out and watched her crumple to the floor like a marionette with its strings cut. I think you get it from there. I don't need to get into too much detail, do I? Clearly, if I'm here, then it means I was stopped, eventually. I could talk about all the kids in that school I killed, but that's not what I want to talk to you about. What I do want you to learn from this story is that you and I are a lot alike. I don't think it's odd or scary at all. Like I said before, we all have things buried underneath us all, waiting, and even wanting to come out. Things we'd rather forget ever existed, but there will always be a part of us that wants those things to come out. That's what happened to me. I'm not any different from you. With that said, any one of us can be a cold-blooded killer or whatever they want to call me these days. You just have to learn to accept that what happened to me was something nobody deserved. But that doesn't mean it won't happen again, either. The fact is, there will always be normal people in the same situation like I am that will be forced by whatever means to take those measures. That's just something you're going to have to accept. This will never be stopped, and somebody is always going to be murdered. I promise you. Why? Because we all, to some degree, want that lock broken.
Does anyone remember this kid's show? It was called Candle Cove, and I must have been 6 or 7. I never found reference to it anywhere, so I think it was on a local station around 1971 or 1972. I lived in Ironton at the time. I don't remember which station, but I do remember it was on at a weird time, like 4 p.m.
It seems really familiar to me. I grew up outside of Ashland and was 9 years old in 72. Candle Cove. Was it about pirates? I remember a pirate marionette at the mouth of a cave, talking to a little girl.
Yes! Okay! I'm not crazy! I remember Pirate Percy. I was always kind of scared of him. He looked like he was built from parts of other dolls. Real low budget. His head was an old porcelain baby doll. Looked like an antique that didn't belong on the body. I don't remember what station this was. I don't think it was WTSF though.
Sorry to resurrect this old thread, but I know exactly what show you mean, Skyshale. I think Candle Cove ran for only a couple months. In 71, not 72. I was 12 and I watched it a few times with my brother. It was Channel 58, whatever station that was. My mom would let me switch to it after the news. Let me see what I remember. It took place in Candle Cove, and it was about a little girl who imagined herself to be friends with pirates. The pirate ship was called the Laughing Stock, and Pirate Percy wasn't a very good pirate because he got scared too easily. And there was calliope music constantly playing. Don't remember the girl's name. Janice or Jade or something. Think it was Janice.
Thank you, Jaren! Memories flooded back when you mentioned the Laughing Stock in Channel 58. I remember the bow of the ship was a wooden smiling face with the lower jaw submerged. It looked like he was swallowing the sea, and it had that awful Ed Wynn voice and laugh. I especially remember how jarring it was when they switched from the wooden plastic model to the foam puppet version of the head that talked.
I remember now too. Do you remember this part, Skyshell? You have to go inside.
Mike, I just got a chill reading that. Yes, I remember. That's what the ship always told Percy when there was a spooky place he had to go in, like a cave or a dark room where the treasure was. And the camera would push in on Laughingstock's face with each pause. You have to go inside. With his two eyes askew and that flopping foam jaw and the fishing line that opened and closed it. Just looks so cheap and awful. You guys remember the villain? He had a face that was just a handlebar mustache above really tall, narrow teeth.
I honestly thought the villain was Pirate Percy. I was about 5 when the show was on. Ugh, nightmare fuel.
That wasn't the villain. The puppet with the mustache. That was the villain's sidekick, Horace Horrible. He had a monocle too, but it was on top of the mustache. I used to think that meant he only had one eye. But yeah, the villain was another marionette, the Skin Taker. I can't believe what they let us watch back then.
Jesus H. Christ, the Skin Taker. What kind of kid show were we watching? I seriously could not look at the screen when the Skin Taker showed up. He just ascended out of nowhere, on his strings, just a dirty skeleton wearing that brown top hat and cape, and his eyeglasses that were too big for his skull. Christ almighty.
Wasn't his top hat and cloak all sewn up crazily? Was that supposed to be children's skin?
Yeah, I think so. Remember, his mouth didn't open and close, his jaw just slid back and forth. I remember the little girl said, "Why does your mouth move like that?" And the Skin Taker didn't look at the girl but at the camera and said, "To grind your skin."
I'm so relieved that other people remember this terrible show. I used to have this awful memory. A bad dream I had where the opening jingle ended. The show faded in from black, and all the characters were there, but the camera was just cutting to each of their faces, and they were just screaming. And the puppets and marionettes were flailing spastically, and just all screaming. The girl was just moaning and crying like she had been through hours of this. I woke up many times from that nightmare. I used to wet the bed when I had it.
I don't think that was a dream. I remember that was an episode.
No, not possible. There was no plot or anything. I mean literally just standing in place, crying and screaming for the whole show.
Maybe I'm manufacturing the memory because you said that, but I swear to God, I remember seeing what you described. They just screamed.
Oh God, yes, the little girl, Janice. I remember seeing her shake, and the skin taker screaming through his gnashing teeth, his jaw careening so wildly. I thought it would come off its wire hinges. I turned it off, and it was the last time I watched. I ran to tell my brother, and we didn't have the courage to turn it back on.
I visited my mom today at the nursing home. I asked her about when I was little, in the early 70s, when I was 8 or 9, and if she remembered a kids show, Candle Cove. She said she was surprised I could remember that, and I asked why, and she said, "Because I used to think it was so strange that you said, 'I'm gonna go watch Candle Cove now, Mom,' and then you would tune the TV to static and just watch dead air for 30 minutes. You had a big imagination with your little pirate show." Modern playing cards are filled with layers of meaning and symbols that can be traced back centuries. The Four Kings, for example, are based on real rulers. The King of Diamonds represents the wealthy Julius Caesar. The King of Clubs is the brutal Alexander the Great. The King of Spades represents the strong but kind David of Israel. And the King of Hearts represents the emotionally disturbed Charles of France. It is this king that we will be dealing with today. It should also be noted that Charles was the only one of the four who was actually there to see the day his face was printed on a playing card, which may rationalize why he acted apart from the others. Charles' visage was put on the King of Hearts at the very beginning of his rule, but he never really got a chance to come into contact with playing cards until many years later, when he became very ill with a fever, and was informed that he would be bedridden for the rest of his life. It was during this period that Charles began learning card games to pass the time, such as an early version of blackjack. Charles lay in his bed for 2 years, constantly fiddling with the cards and always getting weaker. As time passed, there were reports that Charles had begun obsessing over the idea that the king, being the 13th card in a suit, was causing him bad luck. He talked about how he was starting to see the number pop up everywhere, and that he was close to figuring out its secret. Of course, his ramblings were blamed on the fever, and by the end of the second year, he had been declared insane, and his son, Louis, took over the throne. One day, several months after the end of his reign, one of Charles' physicians went to his chamber to find the frail old man standing in the middle of the room, wielding a large sword. Before the doctor could react, the king said, "They have shown me the truth of 13, and it is not meant for mortal eyes." Without hesitation, the king proceeded to ram the blade in through the left side of his head, between the ear and temple, until it came out the other side. He wavered a moment before collapsing to the floor, dead. After the incident was announced and it was made public that the king had gone mad, the image of Charles in the King of Hearts was altered to show his suicide. Although the picture is now shown significantly less graphically, the image of Charles thrusting the sword into his skull can still be found on modern-day playing cards. Perhaps the strangest part of the whole story, however, is the day that Charles chose to kill himself. 7/6/1462. Whether it was intention of the king, the facts that 7 plus 6 equals 13, and 1 plus 4 plus 6 plus 2 equals 13, can only be explained as coincidences. Kushisake Onna is the legend of a Japanese woman, mutilated by her jealous samurai husband who murdered her for infidelity, scarring her horribly and leaving her repulsive. Her jealous ghost still haunts places in Japan, usually on foggy nights. She wears a surgical mask, and she will approach people and ask, shyly, "Do you think I'm beautiful?" The person usually responds, Yes. She then pulls down her mask to reveal an ear-to-ear grin, cut by her jealous husband to mark her for her life. How about now? She will persist. If you answer no, she will reveal a pair of scissors and kill you. If you answer yes, she will then cut the same smile onto your face. There are several ways to prevent this terrible fate. 1. To confuse her by saying, "You're average." 2. Present her with hard amber candy, which she'll take much delight in, and let you go. 3. Say pomade 6 times. She will then flee. 4. Ask her if you are beautiful, which will confuse her, hopefully long enough to escape. Be wary. She is said to be incredibly fast and will be unlikely to stop. She has been seen from the 1970s until the early 2000s, often seen lurking near children, whose innocent answer of yes, when asked if she is ugly, will lead to their deaths. Occurring to the fact that most kiddie shows have turned out dead ends, one show, Candle Cove, has made an impact here. I've made myself hunt down whatever cast remained of the show, regardless of their fear. I wanted to know everything about the show, but in the process, I came to understand that there hid something much darker aboard it than just what I was told and what I had heard. Throughout this, you may notice that a censor will appear. I did that so no one may want to bombard me with questions and such. It's a privacy thing, and I'm sorry if I offended the readers or listeners. With that, I present to you this page in the lore, Candle Cove Experiences, Tales of the Laughingstock. Day 1. My first knowing of the Candle Cove lore came out on the Net Nostalgia forum back some time. However, many of the episodes had never been found, and many of the props are either long gone or spread out all over the world. However, after this mention of the show, I had to dig further into it. What I discovered over my round trip was something dark residing with the studios itself. The show, originally called Pirate Place, was loosely based on an old, quite lost short story called The Knickerbocker's Tale, from 1767 about a little Irish boy arriving to a land of pirates to find his way back home. The story's writer, a man believed to be named Colin Cochrane, vanished into the dark. Stories about it say that he was a madman who married well and had a daughter who vanished without a trace near his home. This inspired him to write the story, and shortly after, he was found dead by his wife. The story was lost for several years until in 1970, when a local TV station in Ashland found the rights to the story and converted it into a children's series. I managed to find some of the studio workers, but none of them were able to tell me about it. Well, there was one. Day 2. Asking this woman to practically relive her nightmare of 1971 was nearly impossible. But thankfully, she agreed to. Reluctantly, anyways. Okay, miss.
I am not comfortable giving my last or my first.
Okay then. Mind if I call you Jane?
No, I don't.
Okay then. Well, Jane, I understand you had a part in the kiddie show Candle Cove, correct?
Set designer. Well, part of it. I helped in the construction of the laughingstock, and many of the other characters as well.
I see. Was it a good experience?
Oh, very. It was a great one. Until towards the end of the show itself.
How so?
Well, that damn Grimes. That's what it was.
Grimes. Emerson Grimes, the show's director?
Is there another Grimes you know in the series?
Here she lit a cigarette, something that, from her appearance and fear of Grimes foretold, I actually expected from her. Well, how did he manage to scare you?
How did he? It was a nut job. A loony. He forced a 5-year-old girl to near heart stroke. Changed the scripts. Everything was fine until the show grew darker and darker.
How dark was it getting?
When a skeleton named the Skin Taker proclaims that the reason for his mouth to move weird is for grinding your skin. You will have some problems, but Grimes was insane. The last straw was the last episode of the series.
Now, this I kind of knew about. The infamous question to the Skin Taker and his answer to Janice. I knew about this and moved on to her designs of the show. She explained that it was a damned kiddie show that turned into a puppet show from hell overnight. She wanted to end the conversation, but not before I asked about any surviving members or crew.
There are a few of them still around, but you have to find them on your own.
Day 3. I did, however, manage to find Jodie Silver, who played Janice on the show, now an adult of 45. She resides with her husband, Damon Lewis, and her 2 kids. If you see her now, she's lost all that childhood spunk that she had on the show. She works as a writer of pirate stories and haunted mysteries. I managed to record, on tape, an interview with her. Are you Miss Jodie Silver?
Why, I haven't been called that in years. Yes, I'm Jodie Silver, but people call me Jodie Lewis nowadays.
Oh, I'm sorry about the mix-up. And I'm writing a book on an old kiddie show you used to be on.
Jesus Christ. Please tell me you're joking.
It was here that I noticed she seemed agitated at the sound of a book being written on something that she was trying so hard to put behind her. It's no joke, Miss Lewis.
Well, I won't warn you. You're a total nutcase for doing it. That show has given me bad dreams. Ruined my childhood. I even had therapy because of it. I don't wish to speak about it.
Please, Jodie, just one interview, that's all I'm asking for. Just one. Hell, if you have to go through therapy again for it, I'll personally pay out of pocket. It was here she stood long and hard.
Christ. Fine. Meet me here for an interview.
With that, she handed me a card with her address on it. I promised that she wouldn't regret this, but I had a feeling she already was. Day 4. Hello there, Miss Lewis.
Well, hi there. Come on in.
Her house wasn't big, but not small either. I could tell she had little ones running about from the sounds of kiddie shows floating faintly from the television set and many toys scattered about. It was like trying to walk through a forest of mousetraps without setting one off. Eventually, we got to the small dining area of the home, the good outlook over the water. A place to dream dreams. Okay, now about the show?
Well, it started out as a dream come true. I was a huge fan of shows like Jumbo Circus, Sunshine City, and Fisherman Fred, and I really wanted to be on a kiddie show. I got my wish when I heard the studio was looking for a young girl to play the role of Janice for their new show. And sure, there were many little girls who wanted the role so badly. So I did my best to win the studio over, which happened. I loved the idea of the show. I did my very best to do everything right. Turned out you should be careful of what you wish for.
Why is that now?
I really don't want to tell you, but I must. You see, on set, some changes started happening. Grimes would change scripts. Things seemed to be a bit scary. And for the first episode to seem so mean and such was odd for a kid's show. And then that horrible last episode.
What episode? The last episode of the first season?
Wow, you really need to brush up on your history of this. There were 2 seasons of the show, and the final episode of the second season was the worst ever.
I tentatively and carefully asked her to tell me.
Screams. Just screams. Everyone screaming, and that sick man Grimes destroying the sets. He told everyone to just scream, and loudly. Many did. It got to the point where one of the actors, the man who played the skin taker, started to bleed. He nearly choked on his own blood. I bawled my eyes out.
It was there she started to cry, all these memories coming back to her. She asked me to stop, and I did. I explained that I was sorry to bring back all these memories. I never meant that as my intention.
I remember the skin taker. He hung his head, tilted and low, his jaw hanging from one socket, parts of his arms torn off.
Day 5. I left to go find Michael Collin when I came across a yard sale. I know, creepypasta-ish, right? I asked them about some old recorded tapes I saw, and they said they were mostly shows for their son when he was young. I noticed that some of them were from Candle Cove. Although they were very smudged and probably in horrible condition, I bought the videos from them anyway. Now, it's probably here where you would expect me to say that I popped in the tape and evil shit happened. Satan appeared threatening to rape my soul, and Pirate Percy came at me in a dream as a cannibalistic demon, something like a creepypasta-ish event, right? That's not the case, folks. I popped it in, and sure enough, static. But eventually it came on. Sure, it was jumpy, and it was a static juncture, but it was the show. It was an odd first show, being that Janice was made fun of so horribly, and that Percy would proclaim for her not to kill him. And the thought of kidnapping on the show was an odd tidbit to be in there. But it had to continue. Sadly, I didn't make it past episode 2. Day 8. There was a gap due to a break for a while. I pursued my interest in finding any contact with crew members or cast members aside from Jane and Jody. I managed to find a Mr. Walter Shea, who was a stagehand on the show. I managed to write this letter. Dear Mr. Shea, my name is and I'm writing a book entitled Candle Cove, Experiences, Tales of the Laughingstock. I'm interviewing whatever remaining crew and cast there are from the show. I was wondering if we could arrange a possible meeting with one another, or an actual interview. Of course, if that's alright with you, I can be contacted at the Nahoma Motel address. Thank you for your time. I received a letter sometime later.
Dear, you may be the dumbest person I have ever met. Why in the hell would you dare bring up such a subject that has haunted me and everyone else on that show? Do you know the absolute tragedy that has accumulated from that? But it's also a way to get things off my chest from it. I will meet you for an interview, but what I say about that show is 100% truth. Eyewitness. You must not judge what I will say. If you do, I'll make sure that your journey will end with me. Enclosed is a card for where to meet me and at what time. I am not a snobbish man, but I won't do this again. Sincerely, Walter Shea.
Day 15. I met with Walter Shea later on within the week, having to time it right. I left after day 10 for Tulsa. It took some time to watch the other episodes, but I managed. They did seem darker, as Jane had stated before. Some of them are getting hard to watch, but I have to keep watching. The infamous "To Grind Your Skin" episode came on. That one was the worst. It's one thing with a shitty motel TV that makes every program like watching something from the 70s. It's another when the damn tape keeps jumping and staticking out every 2 minutes. I felt like those people trying to watch porn on their old boxes, if you know what I mean. Scramblers. Anyhow, I got to meet him where he wanted. He came in on a wheelchair, explaining how he was paralyzed. Okay, now Mr. Shea, you said that you had information?
Yeah, that whole damn show is a curse.
What do you mean by that?
You could only dream of what I mean. It's exactly how I said it. That show is a curse.
I don't understand. Really, I don't.
I broke my leg on that show when a damn ladder fell off and smashed on my leg after I fell. I felt something when that hit, like something pushed that ladder down. Then the episodes got darker. There were 2 episodes that never aired in season 2. Those 2 were the worst of the worst.
What happened?
That Grimes in one episode has Janice, implied of course, to be cannibalized by the skin taker in a dream. Another one was to reveal that Nathan had been kidnapped and turned into part of a cape for that bastard. Hell, Grimes wanted to fucking have Janice killed and skinned alive. On camera. The end of the series was to have continued with Melrose winding up in the world looking for Janice. Me and the cast had to make sure that never happened, so we shot those ideas down every time. This pissed him off. I think that's why he did that final episode. You know, the screaming episode.
You mean he wanted to show a little girl being skinned alive?
Yes. And that fucker is a monster too. He didn't vanish. I will tell you something I have never told anyone.
Go on.
After we finished filming that episode, I went back to get something of mine. I saw Grimes pleading to the set pieces, as if they were all alive. He was pleading that he did his job right. He made sure. He started ripping his hair and teeth out, screaming, trying to get whatever it was away from killing him. He fell backwards and hung himself on a cord. The sound of his neck snapping. God, it still haunts me.
They said that he just vanished. You're stating he lost it and accidentally killed himself?
Yes.
Now, I knew something horrible did happen. It was freaking me out, and now I wanted to stop, but I had to know what happened to Grimes.
They never found the body. I got rid of it. I couldn't let them think that he had just wanted to make things happen to himself. I had to do something out of the decency of my being at least.
What did you do?
I buried him. I took his old lanky body out to the woods behind the studio, and I buried him. I told myself there was nothing to fear but fear itself. But there was something there. I walked back through the studio, and I felt something, an eerie presence in the skin taker puppet, like it was watching me. I got out of there as quickly as I could. Sometime later, that damned final episode aired, and I will never forget what I saw. It was horrible.
I was afraid of the show now. What was lying ahead of the episodes for me? I had some more stops to go to, but I advised myself that if things got too deep, I would stop there and work with what I had. Day 19. It's been hard to sleep. I keep having the same nightmare. The skin taker coming at me, threatening to grind my skin. It's hard to wake up to just static because I can hear that fucking theme song in my head every time I do. I gave up a little, but I had to keep going. I made a list of people who claimed to have items from the series. Some proved to be idiots, who just made the items themselves. Indications were of the modern look to them. However, there were some who did have items. The items I have gotten so far are listed. One of the skin taker's glass eyes. The arm of Pirate Percy. The hat, albeit somewhat in tatters, of the skin taker. One of the eyes of Horace Horrible. Tooth belonging to the laughingstock. The most unique item I found, and I swear to you, I found this one at a house in Missouri, The original owner was a man named Kyle Bartlett. His daughter, Judith, was nice enough to show me part of a collection he had. He had the original Skin Taker head. Now, I thought it was a fake, since the jaw was intact, whereas Jane had stated that the jaw was partially torn off. As it turns out, Kyle was one of the crewmen on the show. He loved the Skin Taker as a villain, and when he found out that it was so destroyed, he put much time inserting the jaw back in its place. I asked to have it, but she denied that request. I did see that it was missing one eye and its famed hat. I brought these items back and put them inside by myself. The head is now complete, but she allowed no photography or video to be made, stating that her father wouldn't want his favorite to be spoiled. She sounded like a mother to a child. I had to keep up. My search led me to New York, where one Mr. Michael Collin lived. The very same Michael Collin who voiced the Skin Taker on the show. The same Michael Collin whose son, Trevor Collin, was murdered in the fall of 1981. Meeting him was hard. He wanted nothing to do with this, but I had to interview him. Really, I did. He refused for some time, until he decided to, eventually. Hello there, Mr. Collin.
Yeah, hi there.
I am sorry about this.
Must not be really sorry to make a man who lost his son 10 years after that goddamn episode had aired talk about this fucking show. You know, the nightmares still haunt me. Every night, I can see that episode playing in my head.
I'm sorry about your son and the nightmares. He took a shot of Jack Daniels and said,
Don't. Not your fault this happened. My wife left me 3 years after he passed on. I had a dream that night, the very night it happened. It was the Skin Taker holding a knife, chasing him and brutally murdering him. It's odd that he was in a neighborhood where a local gang known as the Walking Skulls just so happened to be in, but they don't use knives in their crimes. So it was someone else.
I never knew that.
Never asked me to tell you. And that damn episode screwed my voice up, which is why I sound so different than how I should.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Understand, you see. Grimes wanted the show to be dark. I thought he was nuts. I didn't want to do the grind your skin episode at all, since I read the damn script. He threatened to fire me, and I couldn't let that happen. I had a wife and a kid on the way. I couldn't lose work like that, so I did it, unfortunately.
I see. What happened the night the last episode premiered? He sighed, took another shot of the Jack, and told me.
After that damned episode, I got the hell out of there, went directly home to get all I could. I grabbed my wife and my infant son and got the hell out of town. I left that damn place with dignity and got to a nearby township. I had the misfortune to be in the hospital in time for that final fucking episode to air. I had no choice but to watch it. And I regret doing so.
I'm so sorry to hear that. If you want to, I could leave here, or we could finish, if you'd like to.
Sounds good. I'm sorry. I can't do this. I'm just sorry.
I left him there, crying, actually regretting that I'd left him. I wish I hadn't. Day 27. I was reading a newspaper and I skimmed the obituaries. I am unfortunate to say that Mr. Michael Collin committed suicide some time ago. He shot himself in the head. He left a suicide note, and the NYPD stated that it was a letter to me, It had my name and address on it.
Dear I'm sorry to announce that by the time you read this, I'll be gone. It's not your fault, but the dreams came back hard after the interview. It's much harder for me to deal with it, but last night's dream was the final straw. The skin taker came to me in that damned hat, stating that my son has a special place. I saw a part of my boy's face on the upper right side of the hat, looking at me with a glassy kind of stare. A single tear rolled down his face, and I heard him screaming in agony. It broke my heart. I can't take the dreams anymore. I can't handle it, and I want you to understand that you mustn't go on. Jody told me about your interview with her, and she is planning on coming to New York for the funeral. I told her that she should forget about it, but since you came around, it's been harder for her to forget. I have to cease this. I'm so sorry. I really am. Sincerely, Michael Colon.
Because of this letter, the death of this man, and the nightmares I have trudged up, I am ceasing this project and I'm going home. It's unfortunate to have to quit this, being that I was far, but it is the right thing to do.
Day 30. My name was a close friend of mine, and he asked me to post here. Recently, he killed himself. Where it was a homicide, I'm not sure. Police said that he was working on something, but when the interviewed were questioned, they never said a word, because they knew better than to rat him out and trudge up more nightmares for themselves. Was a wonderful man in life. His girlfriend, who was expecting a baby sometime within the year, was broken up about this. I'm sorry to say that in his message to me, he wrote that he met with one final person after the Michael Cullen interview. He stated it was a man named Adrian Grimes, Emerson Grimes' nephew. He asked for me to put the interview on here. This interview was made via telephone.
Is this Adrian Grimes?
This is he. May I ask what this is about?
This is about the show, Candle Cove?
That show.
Yes.
Look, I don't know who this is, but my uncle's been dead for years. His body was never found, and I swear to you, if this is some prank, it's not funny.
It's not a prank at all. I swear.
Look, you want to know about that show? My uncle was a sick man. He told me about it, and I watched it. Now I will tell you that every single person that was on that show is in their own place on it. I, however, want nothing to do with it. I got to see them making a one episode, alright? One episode. It never got aired, and I hope it never will either.
Season 2, meaning either episodes 5 or 6?
What the hell are you talking about? No, this happened after the season ended. A new director, I can't remember his name. It was supposed to be the season 3 starter. I was invited to be on the show as a character, and my father took advantage of it. Since then, I hate all of the show because my fucked up uncle was part of it. Now leave me alone.
I don't know where to start, where to begin about my feelings of this thing. This story is one that I have had to keep secret, in fear that friends or family may persecute me and send me to a mental facility. What I have seen, what I've heard, has been shot down by many as simple lies. This story will hopefully open the eyes to some who don't believe in my words of it and what it is. Let me start off on a new note. The first time I encountered it was the late summer of 2008. My family's house had been foreclosed since we could just not afford to pay it off anymore because of all the land that we owned. We bought a smaller house in a nice neighborhood that was just about 2 miles away from the one prior. I guess we just liked the area. All was well for a while. I settled into the new home quite alright. It felt like home. It felt nice, pleasant. Even when it rained, you felt safe, secure. One day, after we were all settled in, I decided to go for a walk on the nearby trail. I walked along it. No one else was there, not even as I looked as far in front of me as I could. As I turned around, not even a single person. Seemed a bit odd. It was a nice day out, so why was I the only to enjoy the day on this sidewalk? Whatever. I guessed that I shouldn't have been complaining about having a trail to my lonesome self. I continued my trek and peered to both sides of the trail. To my left, a rather small but steep hill that led to more houses, and to my right was just a patch of thin woods, teeming with green trees and dirt. The woods ran across the trail the entire way. Being myself, I jumped into this nest of foliage hoping to find some adventure. I looked around, examining everything I saw. I picked up a stick and began to swing it like a sword. I continued inside the small, narrow woods to find something that mildly disturbed me. A small rabbit, about the size of a large man's shoe, laid dead across the leafy, earthy floor. I dropped the stick and knelt down on one knee to examine it further. Its stomach had been torn down the middle, with the entrails barely seeping out. Something more odd was that there seemed to be no bite marks or scratches, as if it just seemed to die. Then a weird feeling in the back of my head entered. A tingling feeling. It didn't hurt, but it was very irritating. It made me want to just hit my head against a tree to make it stop, but even as a child I knew that that was foolish. I didn't feel any more adventure in me after the rabbit, so I trekked back home and ate supper without informing my family of the rabbit. The next morning I woke up to hear talking downstairs. My mom and my sister were talking about something on the deck. I woke up and looked to my mom, who had a disgusted look on her face. "What's going on?" I asked in a worried tone. "I think an animal left some of its lunch on our porch." I looked out to see, under our porch swing, was a pile of animal entrails. I whispered to myself, "The rabbit." My mom cleaned them off, then threw them away. Nothing more happened, at least not during the day. It went on as all days go on. But that night, I had a dream, or at least I thought that it was a dream. It started out with me in the woods. I was laying down in the same spot where I found the rabbit. I was cold. I was naked, and I didn't have a clue what was happening. I couldn't move, but I saw in the distance a shadowy figure that seemed to be constructed of the very darkness surrounding me. It seemed to be almost a good 7 feet tall. It had a deer-like shape for a head, horns curled from his shoulders and back. He walked like a man, but he had hooves, or what seemed to be hooves. I don't know. He, or it, walked toward me, creeping past the trees. A once dark forest had been made even darker as a cloud of misty fog followed its trail. It spoke in a demonic, monotone voice.
You think that you are of a higher importance than a rabbit? That you are greater?
I couldn't respond. I was shocked at everything that was happening. He spoke once more.
The earth will die, and all will cry. Bring the tears of the unfaithful, the untrustworthy, and the cynical men and women to me. They won't know me by an image, but by their undying fate. Maybe they should have listened to the crazy man on the street. Maybe they should have listened to the one who tried to convince them that it was no myth, or of what they all saw was indeed true flesh and fact. You know, my son, that little thing that just catches your curious eye, that little unnatural feeling that makes you feel out of place, that something is wrong. That physical feeling when you feel something touch you, but you debunk it as just your mind. That is me, the Midnight Man.
He knelt to my level, and with a soft yet noticeable touch, he prodded my stomach with a pointed, sharp claw. He arose and walked away. I peered at my naked body. My stomach turned into a shadowy black, and it traveled through my bare body. Just then, I awakened in my bed, sweating through my sheets. I glanced down to my pillow to see it covered in blood. I touched my face to feel blood dripping from my nose. Since the day these events occurred, I have been seeing more and more things, and my self-being has changed. My grades in school dropped, and I began to slack off and focus on the world out of school, the woods, my house, the Midnight Man. Though I haven't seen or heard of him since, I can feel his presence within me. I don't know if he's evil or good. I do know that I know more about life and my self-being after my encounter with him. I still suffer from the tingling in my head, and I always think about what he said since that day. I believe that this man can enter anyone's thoughts and well-being and break you down until you change entirely. This thing is dangerous to anyone, and whatever this thing is, it must be stopped.
If you think about it, there are some things in this world that aren't meant to be scary, but most often they are. Take Candle Cove, for instance. The guy who created the show seemed like he was trying to make an innocent enough children's show. Creepy, but innocent. I have a bit of a history with that damn show. Here it is. June 24th, 2010. I'm trying to find out more about Candle Cove. I know it exists because I watched the first 3 episodes, but got bored after the 5th one. I heard that it was getting a new season, and I remember the show. I remembered it as The Pirate Show, and my parents thought it was weird that I would stay up until 5 in the morning, waiting for nothing but static to come on. I didn't know if they were messing with me or not, because Candle Cove is definitely not static. It's something more than that. Something terrible. June 25th, 2010. After writing that first entry, I decided to dig up some news about Candle Cove, possibly even find episodes. I was on the internet at about 12 midnight when I received a text message from somebody with a name like 01001101, etc., etc. This message said, when decoded from binary to text, meet me. Meet me. What did he mean, meet me? Was I supposed to meet whoever this was somewhere? I don't know. June 26, 2010. I found an episode of Candle Cove. It was from season 1, and it was at least the 5th episode. It's funny because I don't even remember seeing something like this. The episode that I saw depicted it being Janice's birthday, and the pirates and the skin taker, and the rest of the characters sing happy birthday. Then Skin Taker broke off into a weird song, which I assumed to be called 1 Year Closer. When he finished the song, all the puppets kind of stared at the camera, their eyes glassy. Then, out of nowhere, skeletons come out. Yes, you 4chan fans, you can literally say skeletons popped out. The scary thing about it was that the skeletons kept grabbing near Janice's breast area and touching her butt. June 27th, 2010. I've contacted someone I met over the internet who apparently watched Candle Cove when it was on TV. He told me to come to his house and interview him. At first I was weary, but then I realized it was Candle Cove we were going on to talk about. When I got there, I noticed his TV was immaculate, but that was most because he had nothing but a TV and a bed in his house. It looked like he didn't have any food in the house either. When I was asking him questions, he kept staring off into space. It took me seconds, sometimes even minutes, to get him to come back to Earth and keep talking to me. When I brought up the skin taker, he just screamed and fell over, unconscious. I tapped him, but it seemed as if he wouldn't wake up for hours. After that might sound creepy, but I'm doing anything to find anything about Candle Cove. Went upstairs to search his room for anything that had absolutely anything to do with that damn show. I found concept art. I could barely even tell what it was. There was also a note that I'll read from the guy who lived across the street from me when I was younger, who I will describe better in the next entry. But for now, I need to get some rest. June 30th, 2010. Wow, I slept for nearly 4 days. I don't even remember doing that. Even I remember some dreams that I had during the 4-day period thingy. Skin Taker was chasing me down a long, dark hallway as other villains from the show came around corners. First there was Horace Horrible, then Milo, then something terrible I thought I'd never see again. He was tall and he was dressed like a normal man, but he was also decaying terribly, and I could literally smell his terrible, burning flesh as he stumbled around the corner. The man was some strange old guy who lived on my street when I was 10, who would sometimes go onto my lawn when my parents were at home, and stare in through my window. I remember his house burning down about 2 years later when I was home alone. Apparently it was suicide. I don't really know what made him burn his house down, but I feel I must go into this house tomorrow to look for clues. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. Here's the note that I found at the man's house.
Dear Lucille, I don't know how much longer I can take this. The nightmares are becoming more frequent, more disturbing. Most of them are of him, but all of them have the same picture of the kid who lives across from me, with his eyes gouged out. If only there was a way I could warn him about the damn Candle Cove show before it's too late. Sincerely, Bill.
June 31st, 2010. What I saw in that house will most likely not let me sleep for days, maybe even years. The house was nothing but a patch of dirt now, but I dug into the dirt as soon as I hit something. The material scraped against my fingernails. As I took the packed dirt off the top of it, it was a note. It reads, Percy was a pirate. He was the greatest one around. Percy was a pirate. He never wore a frown. Until one day Mr. Skin Taker came to town. He took all the children's down to his workshop, where he could chop and sew skin to his new cape, always looking for new children to rape. This is getting disturbing. July 1st, 2010. I'm regretting getting involved in this. Every time I get home from school, I swear I can hear screams of those poor children. Their skin ripping from their flesh, being taken off their bones and stuck onto the skeleton man's cape. I'm ending this for now, and I thank everyone who helped me for the help. I don't know what I'll do after this. Maybe I'll even destroy the notebook, but one thing's for sure. I'll never search for that damn show at all, ever again.
My name, it's Trey. You see, my friend died a couple days ago. He killed himself. Before that, he had stopped by my house and gave me a present. I recently opened it and found out it's a bell. I put it on my desk and got ready for bed. It's nighttime now. I can hear something. The bell is ringing. I look over to where I had put the bell, and I see a man, an old man, sitting cross-legged on the floor, ringing the bell. Naturally, I was freaked out, wondering how this strange man got into my room and why he is ringing the bell. If he was a robber, he would have taken something, but no. He just sits there, staring off into space and ringing the bell. I don't know how I managed, but eventually sleep found me. I awoke the next morning to find him gone, bell on the desk where I left it. This continued for a few nights, until I had enough. I decided to confront the man, so I lay in bed, pretending to be asleep. I hear the door open, and in walks the man. He sits on the floor, grabs the bell, and starts ringing it. I grab my lamp, the closest thing to me, and swing it at him. But before the lamp hits him, he just disappears. I sit there, in silence, confused about what happened. The next night he didn't come, but I had a strange urge to ring the bell. It was as if it called to me. So, I grabbed it and sat down. I began ringing it, over and over again. It was actually amusing. I continued until I had stayed up all night, ringing. This continued. I don't like this. There's something off about it, but I can't stop. I quickly pack the bell in a box, and I mail it to my best friend. Now, finally I'm free. All that's left is to pull this trigger. A couple of months ago, I began my classes at Chico State University. As I was preparing for my freshman year, I was able to find everything that I needed, except for a laptop. I'm not exactly very good at letting $1 go for something, especially when I could get that something for less. I scoured the internet for good deals on laptops, finding none that suited my frugal habits. Classes were only 2 weeks away, and I was becoming desperate for a computer. Several days later, I saw an ad in the newspaper for a laptop that was being sold for only $600, and not too far from where I live. It was a very nice Dell laptop too, seeming odd that it was being sold for almost $1,000 less than store price. I drove to the seller's address the following day. The house was farther out of the city, butting up to a dense forest. Outside of the house was an old Chevrolet, and a mess of old signs and other various vintage-looking items. I rang the doorbell, and a thin man in a flannel jacket came to the door. When I asked about the laptop, he seemed almost relieved, and told me he was ready to sell it immediately. Luckily, I came with cash in hand, and after proof of good condition, I went home with a new computer. Excited to have my first self-bought laptop, I powered it up and began uploading my own programs and applications onto it. Upon searching the hard drive, I found a folder hidden away on it, which was odd, because the man selling it told me that the memory was wiped clean and ready for a fresh start. The folder was titled 09/17/10, presumably a date. I opened the folder, revealing 6 videos and 3 pictures. Curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to watch the videos. The first video was simply titled 001. The video was shot from a shaky camcorder inside of a vehicle, recording a woman walking out of a bar and getting into her car at night. After a couple of seconds, the woman drove off, and almost immediately the person recording the video began to drive after her. The video ended after 24 seconds. It almost seemed like the cameraman had been waiting for the woman for a while. Come to think of it, I wasn't too alarmed by this at the time, just a little unsettled. I opened the next video file, titled 002. I assumed that this was the next part of the first video. My assumption was right, as it began with the camera on top of the console, facing out of the windshield. It was raining now, leading me to believe that this was a short while after the first video ended. I could barely make out that the vehicle 2 cars ahead of this one was the same car that the woman at the bar left in. This went on for an unsettling 47 seconds before the camera cut out. I began to get a little nervous, fearing that this might take a turn for the worst. But, as if I was watching a television show, I wanted to see where this was headed. Not totally concerned yet, I decided to press on. The third video was, of course, titled 003. This was the one that got me officially concerned. The clip began from the same shaky hands as the first clip. It was now pouring rain outside of the car, and I could barely make out a figure in a fur coat with an umbrella walking to the front door of a house. I could only assume who this person was, and whose house this belonged to. The figure entered the house and closed the door. The following stillness greatly unnerved me. The only thing that could be heard was the sound of rain dumping on top of the car. After roughly 2 minutes of this nerve-wracking nothingness, the lights inside of the house cut out. Another minute or so went by before the camera was placed onto the console again, and the sound of a person exiting the car broke the stillness. After the car door quietly closed, another figure, this time hooded, could be seen walking towards the house. I began to feel a knot tightening in the bottom of my stomach as the stranger walked around to the back of the house. Whoever this person was, they definitely weren't supposed to be there. After another couple of seconds, the lights to the outside of the house cut out. It was pitch black, and only the rain alerted me that the camera was still rolling. The video ended after about 9 minutes of rain and darkness. I was now pretty sure that this was not an innocent little project, or anything of that nature, and I began to feel stupid for not checking this laptop seller's credibility. Was this person stalking the woman, the same person that I had met with earlier? Throughout the whole experience, I had a dormant thought in the back of my head to call the police, but I wasn't ready just yet. Reluctantly now, I began the fourth video, 004. It was dark again, but the rain had stopped, and I was left with only silence. Not long after the clip began, I could make out the sound of footsteps on gravel, getting louder as someone was approaching the vehicle. The car door opened and the dome light was turned on, and I could tell that the camera was now on the floor of the car, pointing up towards the roof. I heard some fumbling in the background, and suddenly a thump sounded from the back of the truck. An arm abruptly obstructed the camera's view, and a large tarp could be seen being pulled out from the car. I had only one scenario running through my head, and I hoped that it wasn't true. The person picked up the camera and put it back onto the console, and began to back up. They drove for a good 3 minutes before parking in a branched-off road and exiting the car to work on a load they were carrying. 6 minutes after, the car was moved again to a different location, and the camera was picked up and carried underhanded away from the car. I could see now that it was the same shit bucket truck that was in front of the seller's house. I was about ready to call the cops on this creep when the camera turned towards the house, and it was a completely different house than the one that I visited. I was a little relieved by this, though it didn't prove anything. As the fourth video came to an end, I was wondering whether or not I was prepared to see what came next. I could only hope that this was a prank, or at least had a happy ending. 005 began inside the house. It was extremely dark, and the only thing I could make out was a figure that would occasionally walk in front of the camera. It was also quiet for the first few moments, minus the occasional barking of a dog outside. Eventually, a small sound started to appear. The small sound soon escalated to a loud, muffled scream. Shaking and struggling sounds became more apparent as time went on, as well as crying. A light abruptly came on, and the camera was lifted and panned to the center of the room, revealing a beaten and bloody woman tied to a chair. From what I could make out, this was, in fact, the woman from the bar. The camera zoomed in on her face for what seemed like an eternity before stopping. I couldn't believe that this was happening. The original hope that this was a movie or something like that had long since diminished. With only one video remaining, I was beginning to fear for my own safety. I locked my door, closed my blinds, and then I pushed onward. I began 006 with a small hope that this woman was still alive, and that I could have her saved. The final installment of this horror show began in a bathroom setting. The camera was placed on a counter, facing a mirror, in which I could see a door. The only sound I could make out was a familiar sound that destroyed my hopes. Power tools. I sat in front of the screen for what felt like hours before the sound stopped. More silence. Then, heavy footsteps, accompanied by what sounded like something being dragged. The doorknob turned and the door was pushed open. Out of the darkness of the rest of the house appeared a middle-aged woman dressed in what I can only describe as lab attire, sporting a respirator and a pair of long rubber gloves. This, for some strange reason, gave me a small amount of relief. In the reflection, the woman struggled to drag something into the bathtub. As she hoisted it into the tub, I could see that it was a large black garbage bag. I felt like I was dreaming. It felt like I was watching a horror movie unfolding on the screen. She lifted the bag up from the tub, now empty, except for whatever entrails that still dropped out. She picked up the camera and placed it on the ground, facing the tub. On the floor in front of the bathtub was an assortment of corrosive substances and several other empty containers. The woman began to dump the liquids into the tub, which was followed by an awful, awful noise that I can only describe as pop rocks mixed with coke. The video ended, and I was left bewildered and panicked. I finally opened the pictures. The first was a picture of the truck. The second was a picture of the girl tied up before she was beaten. And the third picture brought up a corrupted file notice. But maybe that was a good thing. I managed to keep 2 of the pictures before I handed the laptop over to the police. I was reimbursed my $600 along with the bonus. Apparently, the victim was the young girlfriend of the older woman's ex-husband. The older woman was arrested almost a year before, but was freed of all charges due to a lack of evidence, and the ex-husband was incarcerated instead. I guess this was the missing link. I hope this has solved any unanswered questions, although I'm not sure who the man in the flannel jacket was, or how he got a hold of the laptop, or how he owns the same truck as the murderer. I guess I'll just leave that to the police. I can tell you, with certainty, that most of you who are hearing this had an imaginary friend at one point. A friend you made up because you needed someone, or something, to play with, or to simply kill everyday boredom. These friends vary from person to person. Most people who had imaginary friends described them as human-like figures, with characteristics that described their own personalities. However, no matter how hard you try, making anyone else believe that your imaginary friend is real is nearly impossible. No one, except you, truly believes in your imaginary friends. When I was maybe 5 or 6, I started kindergarten. Not many of the other kids there would talk to me, and I wouldn't start a conversation due to my shy nature. I went through kindergarten with no friends, and not enjoying anything about my upcoming years of education. It wasn't until the beginning of 1st grade that I met Nick. Nick was the first to talk to me, later explaining that his imaginary friend, Eric, wanted us to meet each other. As Nick and I became better friends, he would talk to me about Eric, translating his words and emotions so that we could have one-on-one conversations with each other. As a kid, I thought talking to Eric was like a game, and the rules were made up by Nick. After a couple of weeks, I became more tuned to Eric's personality. Nick would no longer have to translate what he'd say. It became more like talking to a real person. When 2nd grade came, Nick had to leave. Because of his absence, I no longer had any friends. I figured I'd make an imaginary friend, like Eric. Soon, I created Greg, my new best friend. My parents soon became aware of Greg, seeing him as just a silly game that I'd soon grow out of. Before long, I had a bond with Greg, almost like Nick and Eric. However, Greg was more like me. Every day, I would go outside with Greg, we'd run around the yard, and do normal childhood stuff, like throwing rocks into a pond or exploring the woods. As I went further into life, like around 4th grade, I soon made real friends. My interactions with Greg became less frequent. When I was with my friends, I imagined Greg sad and alone, but I still did not talk to him. By middle school, my thoughts of Greg were completely erased. All the time I spent was either by myself or with my friends, doing things Greg and I used to do. In the winter, when I was in 7th grade, I was sledding and throwing snowballs with my friends. This part I remember well. We were at a large hill, trying to see who could go the fastest and bragging about how good we were at sledding. It was one of the moments that you'd never forget. All of us were having fun, until I saw him. Greg. He was standing at the bottom of the hill, shivering in the cold, looking at me with sad eyes. I blinked multiple times, trying to clear the images of him from my mind, as I was shocked to see him again. He wouldn't leave. He just stood there, his expression turning angrier the longer I stared at him. I followed his gaze as he stared at my friends with pure hatred. I looked back at him, and he slowly vanished. Although I never saw him for the rest of 7th grade, I never stopped thinking about that day. His face was imprinted in my mind, almost haunting me. I decided I could get rid of my remorse by completely cutting myself off from Greg. I destroyed pictures and things I had written about him. The only thing I could not destroy was my memories. I thought about Greg less, and I went on with my life. In my freshman year of high school, I started to see Greg again. However, he was no longer the image I had of him as a child. His face was sunken, and there was no emotion in his eyes. I started seeing him sitting down in my classroom and at my lunch table. The one strange thing was, no one would sit where he was, or walk where he walked. It was almost like he was a real person. He showed up wherever I was. All he'd do is follow me. It wasn't too noticeable, but it was obvious he was still there. The more we saw each other, the more I saw he changed his expression. He became angrier and started showing up in unexpected places. He was scaring me to the point that I couldn't sleep, and when I did, he would be there, watching me. He began to show up more often in more places. I started sleeping less, doing worse in school, and I started drifting from my friends. My parents tried to figure out what was happening to me, but they couldn't. They started counseling appointments, later on, visits from doctors, all of whom couldn't figure out what was the matter. I was declared insane and taken to a mental hospital where Greg would stare at me for hours, driving me even more insane. I became very anxious, seeing images of Greg threatening to kill me. I started to talk to Greg, asking, "Why are you doing this? And what's making you so angry?" But he never responded. Then finally, he started to repeat 4 words. "Please don't leave me." Each time he said it, he got louder until he was screaming, his face contorting into a deep, evil smile. This is my last day. As I finish typing this, I will end my torment and get rid of Greg forever. My advice to you is, never forget your imaginary friends. It begins gently at first, softly falling like a child's tears. It is a sad thing, but not so unusual and wholesome in its way. And the wind lightly blows, almost tenderly caressing your face. This will not last, but it's nice, isn't it? In the beginning, there were 2, and they knew love of a kind. The rain comes down harder now, no longer a child's gentle weeping, and not quite an adult's passionate cries for a lost love. It is somewhere in between. Then, too, the wind picks up, catching your hair, causing it to fall across your face. It speaks in the way that wind speaks, a soft moan, nothing more yet. Time passed, and the two brought forth children. The children built and bred and grew, thousands, then millions. The rain has not changed. It does not fall with greater intensity, but in the distance the faint sound of rolling thunder and the flash of a great light. The voice of the wind calls out to it. The clouds gather more strongly. The two were not man and woman, but that is close. In the full distance of time, they grew apart, and so their children suffered. She was not happy with him, but she could not leave him. The rain falls strongly now. If you were not wet before, you are now. The wind's moan has changed to a howl, and the lightning grows closer. The air is charged with possibility. She loved them, but to him they were a barrier, something that caused the coldness that had grown between them. Perhaps that is why she said nothing when they drove him out. Storm is a storm in truth now. The rain stings a little as it falls, water dripping from your hair. The wind's howling pierces your clothing, finding any gap and driving itself through it, perhaps seeking your warmth. You should find shelter, but something is about to happen. Generation upon generation grew, lived, and died. They forgot her name and his. She was still with them, though, and they still loved her in their way. But they lost entirely. He watched from beyond, unable to touch her. Sometimes he lashed out at the skies. The lightning is close now, illuminating the entire night sky, the thunder crackling within a minute or so of the lightning. It should feel cold, shouldn't it? The wind is strong and the rain is fierce, but you are not cold. There is an energy building. A crack has formed in his millennia-old prison. He feels it and rages against it, throwing his might towards it. The crack widens. You stand there, silently staring at the raging heavens as lightning cracks open the vault of the sky. The lines of light hang suspended in the air after they should have ended. Something is coming. He feels freedom. He goes to it. Soon, he will be with his bride once more. He is coming. He is angry. It's your first night in your new apartment. Your stuff is still in boxes. Your furniture, with the exception of the mattress on the floor, hasn't arrived yet. The utilities won't be turned on until the next day, so you're making do without. A flashlight and some candles will do for light until you go to sleep. Despite the creepy feeling of being in a dark, empty apartment, all alone, you chalk it up to nervousness and try to get some sleep. A sound wakes you up. You lay there for a moment, waiting to decide if it was real or just your imagination being too loud. When the sound happens again, you check your cell for the time. 2 a.m. You get up, using your cell phone for light, and make your way towards the kitchen, the apparent source of the noises. At first you think somebody has broken into your apartment, but you choke down your reaction as you stare at the figure. It is a middle-aged man, wearing what amounts to striped pajamas, and standing in front of the microwave with his back to you. Although seemingly solid, you can also see through his body. You're paralyzed, mostly out of fear, but partly out of curiosity. "Hey," you finally manage to say. The man looks in your direction, turning slowly. Your eyes open wide as you realize the man has no lower jaw, letting his tongue hang free. Your vision loses focus, and the apparition disappears. A sound wakes you up. It's your phone, vibrating against the floor. It's morning, or at least light is coming in through the window. You're back on your mattress, and the missed call is from your mother. You're confused about the night before, and still shaking from the experience of what you saw. Was it a dream? Or did you really see a ghost? I used to live in New Jersey, in an old Victorian, right in the smack dab middle of the boonies. Where I lived, cell phones rarely get reception. Back a few decades ago when I was a kid, a housing development went up. Big places. They cleared a few miles of the barrens for it. It was a stone's throw from my place. Once the places were finished, people moved in. City people, really. It was either old people or new families with real young kids. People that wanted to either wind their life down or start a new one up. Nothing special. I knew a handful of the kids through elementary school, but none of them were exactly my age. They were normal. When the people moved in, my mom made an effort to meet everyone, with us being so close and all. There was one guy that stuck out in my mind, mainly because he was bald, yet young. Probably 38 at the oldest, I want to say. My mom said not to say anything because he might have a disease or something like that. Years went by. I grew up and went into middle school. I came home one day. I had to walk because I missed all the buses. I went past the housing development. Glancing down the street, I didn't see anyone. Not a soul. It was around 5:20, according to my watch, if I remember right. Normally, all the fathers were getting home at 5-ish. Curiosity got me. I walked down the street to see what I could see. Every house was dark, except for the bald man's. I glanced in his window and saw about the entire population of the small community sitting in his living room. Children, parents, the elderly, everyone. Standing in the middle of everything was the bald man. It seemed as though it was just a casual meeting. People were talking and laughing. Whatever. I didn't know why the hell I cared anyway. I walked home and got grounded for being late and not calling from the school. That night, my mom got a call from another local neighbor, saying that she was hearing unsettling grinding noises from the small community. My mom said that someone was probably getting work done. When she asked me if I had seen anything on my way home, I didn't answer as I was still bitter that she had grounded me in the first place. The next day, every kid from that small neighborhood was marked absent in school. And the day after that. The police went to investigate that night. The first thing they found was an ear on the front lawn of the bald man's house. A severed human ear. A child's arm was found in a trash can, dumped with a few empty pizza boxes, and a man's split-open torso was located in the woods behind the property, with human bite marks penetrating the flesh. The rest of the community was inside the house. All the entrances, both doors and windows were boarded shut. When they broke down the door, they found the corpses of everyone, the entire development's population. Children, parents, the elderly, everyone. Some were mutilated beyond initial recognition, and most were missing organs like livers and kidneys. Forensics showed that the victims were alive when the organs were taken out. A child's body was also found in the oven of the house, burnt to the point where the skin melted. Forensics showed the child was alive when his skin started to melt. Children, parents, the elderly, everyone. Everyone except for the bald man. A background search on him proved that he was involved in a local sect of the occult, which are known to practice in the Pine Barrens. He fled. He hasn't been found. Needless to say, what happened literally tore our community apart in multiple ways. Instead of the boogeyman, my friends and I had nightmares about something real, about a bald man. Horror movies didn't scare me because I knew they were fake. What happened was real, and that terrifies me to this day. The massacre occurred in 1984, 28 years ago. I'm 41 now. I went back to the site last month. The houses are still standing, but all of them are abandoned. The single road that once connected the community to the outside world is long overgrown. I can't find any police files, nor can I find any news broadcasts about the murders. The houses are still there, but everything that had to do with that place seems to be gone. I could spend hours telling all the urban legends I've heard about it. Weird NJ posted a story in their book, I think. Nothing is conclusive. No newspapers, no files. I searched the records of some of the children from my school. They were never legally documented. But I know. And every other person that witnessed it and lived in West Milford County in 1984 knows. I cannot in any way express to you how much the events that I've described have literally ruined my life. If you doubt the reality of it, the only thing I can say is that you're wrong. This happened. This isn't meant to be a creepypasta, and this isn't an urban legend. The only reason I post it here is because I know that this is a community that will actually read what I'm writing. I'm not sure what I can say to make you believe, but a total of 37 people were murdered in the most brutal ways that I can imagine. The place has a lot of names. It used to be called New City Village. Now it's called Demon's Alley. Look it up for yourself if you don't believe me. People need to know about this. For all it's worth, please share this. The memories I have with my grandmother are very fond. She used to live with my parents and me when I was about 6 and stayed with us until I went to college. She raised me on many wonderful things, such as spontaneous trips to the Natural History Museum, how to pick out flowers for every occasion, and even her own mother's secret recipe for the perfectly fluffy blueberry pancakes. Every Sunday, she would let me sleep in, but I would always wake up when I smelled those pancakes and heard her singing, "You Are My Sunshine." She would always come into my room with a short stack, and we'd share them before heading off to late morning services, and then we would spend the day together. Sunday has always been our day. So, it's my first Sunday back home after graduation, and I can smell those pancakes, and I can hear her singing in her worn and raspy southern accent just faintly. The only problem is, my grandmother died 2 weeks after I left for school, and her singing is getting closer. Hey, did you ever see one of those videos where you're asked to look for or follow a specific thing throughout the video? Then at the end, they revealed that as you were watching, something large and intrusive moved around in plain sight and you never even noticed it. It's frightening how often that happens. Like how I just moved from the doorway into your room as you're hearing this. I would ask that before you listen to this, you switch off all the lights in the house. As you will soon find out, you are perfectly safe. We've always found comfort in light. For early man, it provided security and protection from nocturnal predators, and, in the form of fire, a source of warmth and sustenance. Even now it has the ability to make the unknown known, banish doubt, and extinguish fear. So essential is light to the human condition that its imagery has saturated biblical and secular works alike, inspiring countless philosophical and religious movements since time immemorial. Over time, though, our relationship to light has changed. From an animalistic dependence upon the day-night cycle, we slowly began to manipulate light and its sources, first through fire, and then later on via electricity. Manipulation soon became mastery, and before long, it was possible to flood an entire room with its warm glow at the flick of a single switch. As this relationship changed, however, and as light became more readily available and easily created, no one ever thought to consider the implications. There has always been a tentative balance between light and darkness. manifest in nature as night and day. It was never simply the case that one could extinguish the other so totally as it can now. Even fire, which slowly creeps into existence and blossoms only as the sparks alight, never disturbed this balance. When a fire burns more fiercely, the darkness may ebb and slink away, inhabiting corners and crevices, but it is never truly gone, only awaiting the fire's inevitable decline and return to embers. Such sources of light always allowed time for denizens of the nocturnal hours to slink away and hide themselves. With electric lights and the advent of instant illumination, however, such time no longer exists. In a literal flash, all darkness in a single place can now be dispersed, and the things lurking within revealed. For most nocturnal predators, this is of course an inconvenience, but for one, it is an opportunity. It's more than likely that, from time to time, you've seen it. If you've ever turned on a light in a completely dark room, then certainly, for a split second, as the light flashes into existence, whilst your eyes are still adjusting, you may see its awful, gaunt figure and long, spider-like limbs standing somewhere within the room. As quickly as it appears, though, it disappears, blinking back into non-existence. It happens so quickly that you may have thought it a trick of the light, a chance interplay of furniture and fleeting shadows. Rest assured, though, once the creature disappears, it is gone, and you are safe. Do not misunderstand this timidity. It is not so much the light which it abhors, but rather being seen. On the contrary, it is in fact drawn to light. When shrouded by darkness, it may cause the hair on the back of your neck to stand up, or give you the feeling of being watched. But in its present state, it cannot act. It is only through light that it is given a form. Of course, more often than not, when you turn a light on in a completely dark room, you will see no such spectral figure. As strange as this may sound, this is when you are in the most danger. The reason, you see, is that by turning on the light, you have given it form, but, unless you catch a glimpse of it, not a reason to leave. In such cases, especially if late at night or during the small hours of the morning, it is imperative that you check your surroundings completely, as the creature will not disappear until you catch sight of it. If you do, it will vanish just as before and you will be safe once again. If you do not, however, it will stay there, in the light, unseen. If, for example, you were to go about your usual nightly routine without properly checking for it, perhaps hearing a few ghost stories on your laptop before bed, it will silently wait for you to once again switch off the light. Only this time, it won't be so harmless. Now then, it's time to turn the lights back on. At the end of the 1980s, a horrible murder took place. It was worse than you can ever imagine. It was so gruesome that the investigators refused to release information to the press. In the middle of the day, in a small village in Russia, laid a newly bought house. It was bought by a 29-year-old lady named Amanda Branksnovich. The reason the house was sold was because the lady who lived there before had heard a weird creaking noise that made it impossible for her to sleep, but it was fixed shortly before Amanda had moved in. But after the moving was finished, the creaking came back. She tried to find the creaking source, but whatever she found that may have been the source of the sound, it disappeared. 5 days later, she began to hear a knocking, too. What is going on? She thought. After a while, she found out that the noise came from the biggest wall in the house, the one standing against the bathroom. She couldn't make sense of a damn thing. She looked into the bathroom, but all she saw were blue tiles of marble, reflecting the lamp hanging from the ceiling. She looked all around, and after dusk she found a small crack in the roof. She was so desperate to stop the noises that she ran down the stairs to the kitchen, got a roasting fork, and spent 1 hour and 23 minutes to make a bigger hole in the crack. Then she walked outside into her giant treeless garden, got a stepladder, and climbed into the ceiling, armed just with a photographic camera, so she would be able to see what was causing the noises after the print was developed. Inside, it was dark like a black hole. She got to the wall where the creaking noise came from, but accidentally, she fell into the gap inside it. She was stuck, and sat there horrified, wondering what she should do, stuck in the dark, empty, grim gap. She stared into the nothingness, but then she heard a weak, hoarse, whispering laugh about 5 inches from the back of her head. She barely managed to turn her head around, but she wished that she never did that. It was a face in the middle of the dark. She got out her camera, only slightly able to see what was producing the menacing noise, and hit the shutter button as quickly as possible before being frozen in fear. She was found dead 2 hours later, her charred corpse seeming incredibly mutilated. The face of a scream was stuck on her face, preserving the state she was in right before she died. It was believed the whole slaughter of the young woman went on for a grueling 20 minutes. The cause of death was covered up, and the only definitive evidence, the photograph which she took with her camera, was not revealed to the press. When the police looked at the image, they could barely make out a face in the photograph, but the face was clearly not of a human. The mouth was elongated, the eyes were too large and unnatural, and the general facial anatomy of the creature in the camera were all wrong. When the police tore the house down, from top to bottom, absolutely nothing was found which suggested that such a woman had ever lived anywhere near the area where the photograph was taken. The case was declared unsolvable. It was not until 2004, long after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the beginning of the freedom of the press in the country, was the case brought up again. A relative led an inquest into the photograph, and the police gave the archive to the family. After a large amount of waiting, her loved ones finally had the photograph in their hands. This picture was what they saw. Last year, I spent 6 months participating in what I was told was a psychological experiment. I found an ad in my local paper looking for imaginative people looking to make good money, and since it was the only ad that week that I was remotely qualified for, I gave them a call and we arranged an interview. They told me that all I would have to do is stay in a room, alone, with sensors attached to my head to read my brain activity, and while I was there, I would visualize a double of myself. They called it my tulpa. It seemed easy enough, and I agreed to do it as soon as they told me how much I would be paid, and the next day I began. They brought me to a simple room and gave me a bed, then attached sensors to my head and hooked them into a little black box on the table beside me. They talked me through the process of visualizing my double again and explained that if I got bored or restless, instead of moving around, I should visualize my double moving around, or try to interact with him, and so on. The idea was to keep him with me the entire time I was in the room. I had trouble with it the first few days. It was more controlled than any sort of daydreaming I'd done before. I'd imagine my double for a few minutes, then grow distracted. But by the 4th day, I could manage to keep him present for the entire 6 hours. They told me I was doing very well. The second week they gave me a different room, with wall-mounted speakers. They told me they wanted to see if I could still keep the tulpa with me in spite of distracting stimuli. The music they played was discordant, ugly, and unsettling, and it made the process a little more difficult, but I managed nonetheless. The next week they played even more unsettling music, punctuated with shrieks, feedback loops, what sounded like an old-school modem dialing up, and guttural voices speaking some foreign language. I just laughed it off. I was a pro by then. After about a month, I started to get bored. To liven things up, I started interacting with my doppelganger. We'd have conversations, or play rock, paper, scissors, or I'd imagine him juggling or breakdancing or whatever caught my fancy. I asked the researchers if my foolishness would adversely affect their study, but they encouraged me. So we played and communicated, and that was fun for a while. And then it got a little strange. I was telling him about my first date one day, and he corrected me. I'd said my date was wearing a yellow top, and he told me it was a green one. I thought about it for a second and realized he was right. It creeped me out, and after my shift that day I talked to the researchers about it. "You're using the thought form to access your subconscious," they explained. "You knew on some level that you were wrong, and you subconsciously corrected yourself." What had been creepy was suddenly cool. I was talking to my subconscious. It took some practice, but I found that I could question my tulpa and access all sorts of memories. I could make it quote whole pages of books I'd read once, years before, or things I was taught and immediately forgot in high school. It was awesome. That was around the time I started calling up my double outside of the research center. Not often at first, but I was so used to imagining him by now that it almost seemed odd to not see him. So whenever I was bored, I'd visualize my double. Eventually I started doing it almost all the time. It was amusing to take him along like an invisible friend. I imagined him when I was hanging out with my friends, or visiting my mom. I even brought him along on a date once. I didn't need to speak aloud to him, so I was able to carry out conversations with him, and no one was the wiser. I know that sounds strange, but it was fun. Not only was he a walking repository of everything I knew, and everything I had forgotten, he also seemed more in touch with me than I did at times. He had an uncanny grasp of the minutiae of body language that I didn't even realize I was picking up on. For example, I thought the date I brought him along on was going horribly, but he pointed out how she was laughing a little too hard at my jokes, and leaning towards me as I spoke, and a bunch of other subtle clues I wasn't consciously picking up on. I listened, and let's just say that date went very well. By the time I'd been at the research center for 4 months, he was with me constantly. The researchers approached me one day after my shift and asked me if I'd stopped visualizing him. I denied it, and they seemed pleased. I silently asked my double if he knew what prompted that, but he just shrugged it off. So did I. I withdrew a little from the world at that point. I was having trouble relating to people. It seemed to me that they were so confused and unsure of themselves while I had a manifestation of myself to confer with. It made socializing awkward. Nobody else seemed aware of the reasons behind their actions, why some things made them mad and others made them laugh. They didn't know what moved them, but I did, or at least I could ask myself and get an answer. A friend confronted me one evening. He pounded at the door until I answered it, and came in fuming and swearing up a storm. "You haven't answered when I called you in fucking weeks, you dick!" he yelled. "What's your fucking problem?" I was about to apologize to him, and probably would have offered to hit the bars with him that night, but my tulpa grew suddenly furious. "Hit him," it said, and before I knew what I was doing, I heard his nose break. He fell to the floor and came up swinging, and we beat each other up and down my apartment. I was more furious than I have ever been, and I was not merciful. I knocked him to the ground and gave him 2 savage kicks to the ribs. And that was when he fled, hunched over and sobbing. The police were by a few minutes later, but I told him that he had been the instigator, and since he wasn't around to refute me, they let me off with a warning. My tulpa was grinning the entire time. We spent the night crowing about my victory and sneering over how badly I'd beaten my friend. It wasn't until the next morning, when I was checking out my black eye and cut lip in the mirror, that I remembered what had set me off. My double was the one who'd grown furious, not me. I'd been feeling guilty and a little ashamed, but he'd goaded me into a vicious fight with a concerned friend. He was present, of course, and knew my thoughts. "You don't need him anymore. You don't need anyone else," he told me, and I felt my skin crawl. I explained all this to the researchers who employed me, but they just laughed it off. "You can't be scared of something that you're imagining," one told me. My double stood beside him and nodded his head, then smirked at me. I tried to take their words to heart, but over the next few days I found myself growing more and more anxious around my tulpa, and it seemed that he was changing. He looked taller and more menacing. His eyes twinkled with mischief, and I saw malice in his constant smile. No job was worth losing my mind over, I decided. If he was out of control, I'd put him down. I was so used to him at that point that visualizing him was an automatic process, so I started trying my damnedest to not visualize him. It took a few days, but it started to work, somewhat. I could get rid of him for hours at a time, but every time he'd come back, he seemed worse. His skin seemed ashen, his teeth more pointed. He hissed and gibbered and threatened and swore. The discordant music I'd been listening to for months seemed to accompany him everywhere. Even when I was at home, I'd relax and slip up, no longer concentrating on not seeing him, and there he'd be, and that howling noise with him. I was still visiting the research center and spending my 6 hours there. I needed the money, and I thought that they weren't aware that I was now actively not visualizing my tulpa. I was wrong. After my shift one day, about 5.5 months in, 2 impressive men grabbed and restrained me, and someone in a lab coat jabbed a hypodermic needle into my body. I woke up from my stupor back in the room, strapped into the bed, music blaring, with my doppelganger standing over me cackling. He hardly looked human anymore. His features were twisted. His eyes were sunken in their sockets and filmed over like a corpse's. He was much taller than me, but hunched over. His hands were twisted and his fingernails were like talons. He was, in short, fucking terrifying. I tried to will him away, but I couldn't seem to concentrate. He giggled and tapped the IV in my arm. I thrashed in my restraints as best I could, but I could hardly move at all. They're pumping you full of the good shit, I think. How's the mind? All fuzzy? He leaned closer and closer as he spoke. I gagged. His breath smelled like spoiled meat. I tried to focus, but I couldn't banish him. The next few weeks were terrible. Every so often, someone in a doctor's coat would come in and inject me with something, or force-feed me a pill. They kept me dizzy and unfocused, and sometimes left me hallucinating or delusional. My thought form was still present, constantly mocking. He interacted with, or perhaps caused, my delusions. I hallucinated that my mother was there, scolding me, and then he cut her throat, and her blood showered me. It was so real that I could taste it. The doctors never spoke to me. I begged at times, screamed, hurled invectives, demanded answers. They never spoke to me. They may have talked to my tulpa, my personal monster. I'm not sure. I was so doped and confused that it may have just been more delusion, but I remember them talking with him. I grew convinced that he was the real one, and I was the thought form. He encouraged that line of thought at times, mocked me at others. Another thing, I pray, was a delusion. He could touch me. More than that, he could hurt me. He'd poke and prod at me if he felt that I wasn't paying enough attention to him. Once he grabbed my testicles and squeezed until I told him that I loved him. Another time, he slashed my forearm with one of his talons. I still have a scar. Most days, I can convince myself that I injured myself and just hallucinated that he was responsible. Most days. Then, one day, while he was telling me a story about how he was going to gut everyone I loved, starting with my sister, he paused. A querulous look crossed his face, and he reached out and touched my head, like my mother used to when I was feverish. He stayed still for a long moment, and then smiled. "All thoughts are creative," he told me. Then he walked out the door. 3 hours later, I was given an injection and passed out. I awoke unrestrained. Shaking, I made my way to the door and found it unlocked. I walked out into the empty hallway and then ran. I stumbled more than once, but I made it down the stairs and out into the lot behind the building. There, I collapsed, weeping like a child. I knew I had to keep moving, but I couldn't manage it. I got home, eventually. I don't remember how. I locked the door, shoved a dresser against it, took a long shower, and slept for a day and a half. Nobody came for me in the night, and nobody came the next day, or the one after that. It was over. I'd spent a week locked in that room, but it had felt like a century. I'd withdrawn so much from my life beforehand that nobody had even known I was missing. The police didn't find anything. The research center was empty when they searched it. The paper trail fell apart. The names I'd given them were aliases. Even the money I'd received was apparently untraceable. I recovered as much as one can. I don't leave the house much, and I have panic attacks when I do. I cry a lot. I don't sleep much, and my nightmares are terrible. It's over, I tell myself. I survived. I used the concentration those bastards taught me to convince myself. It works. Sometimes. Not today, though. 3 days ago, I get a phone call from my mother. There's been a tragedy. My sister's the latest victim in a spree of killings, the police say. The perpetrator mugs his victims, then guts them. The funeral was this afternoon. It was as lovely a service as a funeral can be, I suppose. I was a little distracted, though. All I could hear was music, coming from somewhere distant. Discordant, unsettling stuff that sounds like feedback and shrieking, and a modem dialing up. I hear it still, a little louder now.